quite what to do with this one. Part of me says, hey, show the Talavera box, because this is the intro to Talavera, and, well, to Talavera's version 3.0 of the NBS rules. These were only printed and published, as far as I know, in this game box. They're available for download, like all of most companies' rule books nowadays. The map I have out here is for the free print and play of Montebello. This is one of the smallest, maybe the smallest scenario that NBS has ever put out. It was really a teaser put out before Talavera was released. Again, it's print and play. You'll see, hey, my map doesn't quite align. I don't know if they fixed something or if I managed to fuck something up. I'm so bad at print and play. The counters are smaller than normal. I have the normal Talavera counters here. So I have to use, at least to some extent, the actual markers from this. It's going to be hard if I try to import some from a real game. And what else? I don't know what else to say about this side of things. Let me tell you a little bit about my NBS story. This is going to be a bumpy ride, because the first thing that happened was, as I started reading Rules 3.0, I'm like, wow, this isn't the NBS I remember. Now, I read these rules, played both of the print and play scenarios and both of the scenarios that come in. The Talavera box actually also includes Vimiero, another Spanish battle. I definitely played all four of the scenarios in here. I may have played the Marengo scenario using these rules as well. I had that with me. I also think I may have had Aspirin Essling when I got this game, which was while I was in Phoenix very early. The first year I was in Phoenix, I picked this up, and I had almost no games, right? This is the era my Vietnam video was from, because I wanted to show non-gamers what I do. But, well, that's why the video existed. And I walked away from this series after having played a few of the games under version 3.0 thinking, wow, they really got it right. And that's what I've been saying since. But then I looked at these and again, this is not your old style NBS. The old style NBS had fire combat. This does too, but not for infantry units. The musket units are, not great enough range, and the redesigners argue that it doesn't really that it doesn't reflect the tactics that were used. They had low enough ammo, bad enough effective range that there was nothing that really qualified as fire combat from big massed units until they got close enough that it would count as close combat due to the size of the hexes and whatnot. You could always make the argument that the units are real close to each other at the edge of the hexes under the old system. But one thing I did remember was this was streamlined and gave me the same impressions that the original did. We're going to look at the rules. Now, I've got all three. I've got the other two versions. I have the old Austerlitz, which comes with version 1, which had serious problems that needed to be rectified. But it was basically a translation from CWB, and with a little bit added to make Cav more impressive and more effective, and to add the Skirmishers, and to add to make the close combat work a little differently in general. I think actually close combat worked the same. Anyway, there were some rough edges that caused some real problems, mainly surrounding skirmishers. Skirmishers were basically stragglers in that version 1. In version 2, they got rid of that problem. They fixed some other things. I think they added the concept, well, I know they added the concept of heavy and light cavalry and artillery, which had not been addressed yet, and is pretty important if you ask me. You know, when it comes down to it, the people who were translating it were not, I think, big Napoleonics fans. We're talking about Essig, as the designer of the series, he thought that it would translate well into Napoleonics because, hey, gunpowder, right? You know, there's not that much of a difference. And Dave Powell was also involved in it, who I think was more of a Napoleonics fan. This revision uses many of the ideas, but it streamlines a lot of them. So if you remember in the old CWB, and I had this same feeling with Line of Battle and ended up walking away from it with, yeah, you know, it's giving less detail, but maybe I don't need that detail, which is a weird thinking for me, but it occurs in some cases. I think about the idea of fire, you know, a to-hit roll, an armor check, you know, stuff like maybe a specific damage roll. Once you add too many mechanisms into, too many mechanical actions into, say, combat resolution, yeah, you're giving a great story with all that detail, but all that detail is actually obscuring the enjoyment and view of the story because you're just doing all these mechanical acts. Now, in CWB, they give you this hint of, you know, and NBS as well in the earlier versions, of grabbing a, you know, fistful. You have like 5 dice you roll at once to determine your combat effects. Some of the dice don't matter some of the times, but there's, you know, there's like a rounding die and everything. And I got used to that system and was pretty capable of using it fairly effectively. This simplifies all of that, and we'll see how as we look at it. As usual, you've got a nice little booklet of charts and tables. Handling the command, fire combat, which is going to be artillery in this case, and skirmishers. Those are the 2 things that shoot. The Cav Charge has its own section. Close combat has what looks like actually a more complicated system, and it is, because this has to take into account all that firing that's happening, that much of which would have been addressed in the fire combat system. Movement. I don't think things got too much more detailed on movement. I wouldn't have liked it if they did. And then some other stuff here like rallying. I noted a bunch of special combats here. Handwritten, those are notes to myself. I didn't do that on my other play sheet, I think. I don't know. They give you 2 of these, I'm sure. And I wrote it all out on one because I felt like I really needed this, and there was this extra space on here, so I used that up. Thereby downgrading the value of my game, I'm sure, but I don't care. It's not like I sell anything. All right. And here I am delaying as hell how much I can handle things. But some of the key concepts that we want to talk about in NBS are, hey, it's your normal tactical game. The original was very much like the CWB series. You move up, you change your formation to line, you fire at the enemy, and you trade fire. Every now and then you launch melee attacks, close combat. You have the three different major arms here, plus the skirmishers. Is there something else that you want to talk about? Counters for the leaders, etc. These are gun point counters. These are morale state counters. You still have the same morale states that you have from CWB: shaken, disordered, bloodlusted, routed. Counters for squares and skirmishers. Extended lines, where because units in the series are only allowed to fire a worth of firepower out of a hex. The game came both the series CWB and NBS, and because units were larger than A, some of them went up to AAA. Essig wrote in rules for extending your line so that a single unit could cover more than one hex. That way the units could correspond with real units, but they could cover a frontage that they historically could cover. And you could actually divide up smaller units. The rules seem clear so far. I assume that they're pretty damn solid. But the series did take a turn, a major turn. This is a complete rewrite of the series using many of the same ideas. Core concepts in it. It's got the written orders and the acceptance rolls for that. They added random events. So I don't know if it was Powell or someone else. Someone liked throwing random events into games and put an article at one point or another out there that gave all the random events for the CWB games, at least the ones that had been printed at that time. And I've always been kind of iffy about them, but okay. This game actually kind of incorporates them as an official optional rule and puts all the optionals, all the random events tables that are specific to each campaign, to each of the older games, right in the rule book. Gotta say that's a weird choice, but okay. I would have saved the paper and made this optional something that was available online. But for the Talavera and the print and play scenarios, they're included right in the scenario book, which is where I'd say they belong. Okay, let us take a look at what we have. I forgot Detached Artillery. I don't know if I have any in this. Don't think there are any in this. There is an option that adds 2 gun points detached, though, which... Oh, wait, here they are. Yeah. I find the graphics on these counters more difficult to deal with somehow. So the Detached Artillery, any of the artillery, it looks very bad. Now, these print and play counters aren't very readable anyway, and that may be my fault. It's very likely. So let's take a look at what they'd look at with the normal. So here's what a detached gun looks like. This little thing within the NATO symbol is supposed to be the artillery piece, and then you flip it over, and unlimbered, I mean, I guess, I don't know what there is there, you know, and the normal guns look the same way as that. I find the graphics actually as a whole somewhat iffy. I don't have any of the actual pieces here. Let's take a look. But, you know, they're very much what's reproduced on here. Cav is going to be like that in line. And then blown is like this. Infantry is shown like this in line. And this is an infantry column. It looks different to me, and I don't know. I'm finding it hard to quickly visually process what's going on with it. Now, at some point or another, I'm gonna, as I start digging into the rules, I'll note things that are different in the rules. But there's stuff I don't remember from the old version 1, version 2. So for example, I don't remember how they handle Cav Charges. As always, Cav Charges are one of the most complicated things in a Napoleonic game. So I don't know if that changed much, but most of the others I can point out to as I hit them and say, wow, this is significantly different because. But yeah, it's a very much a take the base framework of the old version 1, version 2, which I liked. I liked version 1, version 2. This was a hard sell to convince me before, and it's a hard sell again. I don't know that I'm convinced. I may end up saying, I don't like this. I'm going to go back to the older version. Same feelings I have with Line of Battle, to tell you the truth. You know, I played, what, 1 or 2 of the Line of Battles? I think I played at least 2 of them. I'm still on the fence about that. They won me over after I finished playing Last Chance for Victory or whatever, but there's something in me that still rebels against that streamlining aspect, and what of the story gets dropped because of it. Let me swap batteries and, I don't know, I guess start this. You detect a significant amount of foot dragging here. This feels like learning a new system totally. As much as any normal, you know, as much as most war games do, really, when you pick them up, because it's got enough differences. And even though I've played it before, it never gelled in my mind the way the old ones did. I'm getting older or whatever. All right, let's start looking. Some definitions that are probably important. Okay, here's the normal sequence of play. You go to a command phase. This is when you're going to deal with the orders. Random events. If you're going to play with that option, you roll a die. On a 1, stuff happens. You roll for distorted orders. These are orders that the commander sent to one of his subordinates, but his subordinate basically threw away, didn't understand well enough to do it all. Well, you used to be able to just overwrite them immediately. So, you know, you tell somebody, you send somebody orders, once they get them and they're distorted, you can immediately react to that. Here instead they've decided, well, you know, that's not really reasonable because there are delays and whatnot in implementing orders, so the commander has to finally understand what the state of those orders is. That's a nice little bit of realism. You write your orders, paying for them with command points. Let's go to the order section. This is part I can tell you about. Each army commander, whatever, has a rating, and that'll assign a certain number of command points they can get. And then they design their order. The type of order, engage, complex, or general, is based on what you're doing. Engage means you're allowed to fight. Complex means it has ifs, triggers, maybe multiple sections to it, some of which can include engage portions, whatever. General is, hey, just go here, but don't engage the enemy. So if you run into the enemy on the way there, your order breaks. So general orders are fairly cheap to make, the other two not so much. You have 2 ways of sending the orders, written or oral. Written is used if you want to get a better chance of the order succeeding. You pay that extra cost. Oral, you can just tell an aide, go tell him to go do this. That'll be less likely to succeed. There's one final thing, which is in-person verbal, which uses the oral cost, but is the least likely to be misunderstood or delayed. Like with the CWB, like with Viva la Emperor, I'm going to write up an order log. Now, this game suggests something very complex. I think the Viva la Emperor had something similar to that. Like, this game suggests keeping one sort of spreadsheet of orders on lined paper and then writing the actual orders out on something else so that you have more room to write the orders. So that the order log is really just a detail of which orders have been are currently being followed or being processed or whatever. And then the actual orders are just written on scrap. Or on separate paper and reference between them. I combine the two. I see no reason why I need something. Usually when I need to refer to the order sheet, it's to see just what are those orders. I know the status a lot better in my head than exactly what I wrote down. Like with normal orders, well, we'll get to that in a moment. Okay. So you write those orders down and you write when they're going to arrive. And they arrive basically by counting movement points, hexes, something like that, away between the commander writing the orders and the commander receiving them. And you're assumed to be able to move a certain number of movement points, and I think it's 10, but it's whatever or it may be whatever the leader movement points are, it may be something different. And the idea there is it will take that much time for the order to get there. What it doesn't take into account is the units moving, which is where the Viva la Emperor has a better solution, which is these little orders carriers. You could implement something like that if you wanted to. I don't use it in Viva la Emperor, so I find this so much easier. Local initiative. So this does a few things. One, you have the chance to try to roll and see if your leader can just get initiative. And here you use an 11 to 66 die roll based on the leader's quality, with a bonus, a penalty actually, I think. See, it says +1 if already under general orders. I don't know if that's correct. I thought that was for no order status, but I'm not sure. It may be, that may actually be correct, because the idea there being, I'm in general orders to move somewhere, and now locally I see what I need to attack to do that. So you make a roll, you might get an initiative. It's not it's not very easy. You can see even for good leaders, they don't have a great chance at it. And then they write their orders immediately and take them into effect. It's also possible you get no effect, which is pretty common. And then there's the loose cannon, which is your opponent writes an order for you. It doesn't apply. It only applies for one turn, though. There's two other things, though: default defenses and emergency withdrawals, which you can declare under certain circumstances. Default defenses is basically, hey, I'm under general orders, or I believe I'm not sure I can do it under attack, and we'll see that in a little bit. And I've reached a situation where I need to choose to do something, and rather than throw away all orders, I just drop myself into a default defense and I'll hold this position until I get further information. The other is the emergency withdrawal, which is supposed to only be invoked when really bad things are happening to you. Now, that could be you're being surrounded or you're hopelessly outnumbered and being attacked. But it can also be for attacking units. Attacking units are allowed to do this, and that's where it starts getting kind of fuzzy is, you know, I'm going to make a horrible attack into enemy gunfire. Well, I don't know. At what point are you, you know, overusing that? And that's not clear in this. Attack stoppage checks. Okay. If your command is under engage orders, i.e. it's got orders to move, and a complex command can switch into engage orders. Once it's in engage orders, I think it's always forced to roll these though. You look at the number of subunits in your command and how many of them are wrecked, and that gets you a number. That number is going to be used on this on this chart. This is similar to NBS 2.0 and 1. So whatever that number is, that number is used on this chart going down this way. And then you look at the commander's rating versus that, and that gives you a target number that on 2 dice you have to roll equal to or greater than in order to keep going with the attack. And what's important about this is once you start an attack, it is always possible, even with a really good leader, that you end up failing, that you end up rolling that 2 and your attack just halts for some reason. New order delay reduction. Orders can become delayed, and you will make checks here at this point to determine whether or not you eventually accept that order. And you'll see here they say D6, roll on each turn a 6 on 1 die to accept. That's the delay reduction roll. Then new order acceptance, you combine some values, the sending command rating, the receiver's command rating, the method used can be an advantage or penalty, the complexity of the order, and whatever their current order is. This is important. General orders don't provide a benefit or penalty. If you're already under engage orders, switching the attack plan is going to be more painful than not. If you have no orders, you're in a sort of a general reserve. You're in a very specific state that you can fling yourself into the default defense, but then you're under general orders. And the one thing it does for you, well, it gives you a couple of things. It gives other advantages as well. But in orders side of things, it gives you a benefit to what your total is. And the higher your total, the more likely the order is going to just be accepted as soon as it's taken. There becomes no chance that it gets distorted if it gets high enough, whatever. Whew. All right. So that's the command phase. And this is the big thing that NBS kind of added to the world. But this version has a lot of differences. All right. Phasing player fire phase. The phasing player is allowed to fire his artillery and skirmishers. Again, this is different. Before, the player turn order went command, movement, both players fire. First non-phasing, then phasing. Here, the phasing player has a pre-movement firing to soften up the enemy. And this is a big deal because this is where the artillery really is effective. And then it gets screened by your movement eventually. And I don't think there was a pre-fire phase in the NBS 1 and 2. Terrible Swift Sword, way back in 76 or whatever, had a pre-fire phase. It had a phase where, okay, you could fire your artillery here, and not infantry, just artillery, in order to barrage the enemy and soften them up before you actually advance. And I mean, it's not like you couldn't do it otherwise. It's just this gave you an immediate, I don't know, gives you an extra shot. Then you do movement, which, as usual, for these sort of tactical gunpowder era games, you're moving the whole formation, and you have to worry about that. You have to worry about the terrain effects. Now, one thing you'll see with these terrain, the old NBS games used a layer cake, the same way CWB does. This, once we got to this period, we're using those multiple levels within a hex of change. That's going to be similar to line of battle. I don't remember line of battle well enough to be able to tell you if the solution here is the same solution as they used in that. I'm always a little iffy on it. I liked the layer cake. I thought it worked really well. But here you got to, and this is one place where it's going to be painful to retrofit. It's covered in the rules, but it's going to be pulling, the old movement system and the old line of sight system out to make it work, because those maps just do not work with the line of sight rules here. Skirmishers can be released and recovered during this. Cav charges are resolved. You move into enemy hexes if you want a close combat. But another big difference, there's a close combat phase in this system. The old NBS didn't have one. CWB doesn't have one. The old NBS had you move into somebody's hex, you resolve the close combat immediately. So you could kind of do almost a blitzkrieg type of motion. Use one unit to bust up something, send another unit in to either further hit it, or once it's cleared out, to hit the next unit in an advantage situation. That was an interesting play, but I don't think felt very Napoleonic. And it also made the game more complicated because you had to pause the movement while you're doing it and such not. However, Cav charges are resolved during this period, as is opportunity fire. Now, the Cav charges and counter charges, that's kind of important, because you can do that kind of blitz operations with the Cav alone, which, again, if something could do it, it was Cav. Then the non-phasing player gets to fire his artillery and skirmishers. Then you resolve the close combats where you moved into an enemy hex. You go to a rally phase where you're allowed to recover stragglers. Now, this system restricts the recovery of stragglers more than the other games do. If you have engage orders in play, you can't recover stragglers. You get a bonus, I think, if you have no orders, where you're in that reserve. Rally and route retreat. Units sort of mechanically improve their morale state. I think this was pretty similar to the original and the CWB side of things. Routed units, I think you have to make a roll to do so. And bloodlust, if they're not next to the enemy, still lose their bloodlust. You have the option not to rally routed units. This is important because routed units rally to disordered, which is not a good state to be in if you're near the enemy. So you may want to just keep running at full speed. If your Cav has become blown, you can make rolls to recover it. And then the second player does the same, and then the turn ends. For close combat, the attacker enters the enemy-occupied hex, paying an extra 2 movement points on top of the cost of the hex. If the defender is in a square, they change formation to column and lose a morale point. There's a lot of things in this system which automatically impact your morale, as opposed to make a morale check type things. Defending squares change their formation, yeah. Defending artillery is allowed to perform an opportunity fire during the close combat sequence. During the movement phase, sorry. As the hex is being entered. During close combat phase, though, you check to stand. Now, this depends on the situation. So, for example, if you have a height advantage, your opponent has to check to stand first. Now, the old system was the attacker always had to check to stand first. They had to see if they made it into the hex, after receiving some fire, by the way. And then both sides would fire, the attacker would check to stand, the defender would check to stand, and then you'd roll on the melee table, which was pretty dull. It was, what's your chance of victory, and you throw the other guy out of the hex. Well, this is different. You check to stand first, and the order is dependent on circumstances, as opposed to just always the attacker first. Then you check outcome. So you roll the entirety of the fire and melee combat and everything, all using this one set of tables here. The first thing you're going to do is check formation and size and make a roll and get results against each other. You determine who won, and then you roll for additional losses. No, I lied. I'm sorry. This is if a firefight happens. Yeah, you determine who wins, and I don't remember how that is done. Yeah, okay. It's based on the check to stand. So if the attacker fails their check to stand, they're repulsed, the defender won. If the defender fails their check to stand, they rout from the space, the attacker won. Or the result is a firefight. If it's a firefight, the losses are determined here, based on the size of the two formations and a die roll. And various modifiers. If the attacker wins, or the defender wins, you use this row on the table. And that gives a mixed set of results that includes permanent casualties, stragglers, and morale effects, all off one die roll. Now, this is significantly less variable than the situation you can get out of fire combat and or close combats, and all the details that you're rolling, 5 dice for each time in the old versions of NBS. And I liked some of those stories. Somebody would go in and take no casualties, but they'd break in morale. They'd take little casualties, maybe they'd make a straggler check, they'd make a morale check. And somebody else would take heavy casualties but be able to stand. We'll see how much this degrades the story. And we're going to go into more details later to try to catch what I don't catch out of memory. And then whoever's the loser retreats. If it goes to a firefight, it's automatically the attacker is repulsed. But they don't count as a loser for the casualties. All right. Cav Charge. Cav Charges have two flavors, whether you're attacking enemy cavalry or not. And counter charges work the same way. The attacker announces this is against infantry artillery. The attacker announces the charging stack and target hex. The units in the target hex can choose to form square. This is automatic in this game. There's no morale check. Forming a square in the amount of time of a Cav Charge, these designers have determined you would be able to do. Your unit is trained enough to do so. However, this can trigger both opportunity fire and a morale degradation. Then the attacker moves into the target hex, which can trigger additional opportunity fire or reaction charges along the way. And the opportunity fire you'd want with charging with when somebody changes to square is you drop some cannonballs into that thing. The defender then checks to see if they stand. They're in square, but they still might break and fail. And this is the busting the square idea. It's just, you know, whatever. But if they're successful, you go on to this step. Otherwise, the charge is successful. This is the only way it's successful. You roll for opportunity fire from defending artillery in the target hex. You check the combat result on the appropriate tables. The defender is routed and retreats out of the hex, and follow-up charges are possible. Now, this game allows like 3 follow-up charges. So if the charge is successful, you roll on here. The attacker takes losses. And I think each person rolls, both roll a separate die. The attacker takes losses based on this, which again, a hit, a morale functionality. Here, hits and stragglers. Okay. Once the attacker's done with all their follow-up charges, they will retreat 6 to 12 hexes, their choice, and become blown. And that happens if they fail as well. The attacking cavalry is now facing a square that's standing. They don't want to fight this. So they roll to see if they manage to break off, if they get away in time. If they succeed, there's a break-off effect, which is rolled on here. Modifiers based on the attacker's morale. And that's going to be morale states going down. OF, artillery in the target hex may fire before break-off. Which, what does that mean? Why would that be there? That might be that they didn't get... Yeah, I'm not sure why that's there and the morale penalties are not, but whatever. The Cav Charge will then be repulsed. There's opportunity fire from the defending artillery. In the target hex, you check the combat result on the appropriate table. The charge ends, go to 9, and the attacker retreats. Against other cavalry, we use a different set of tables, and you can see, you know, I'm looking at something that is still complex, and maybe more complex in some ways, but it does streamline the number of die rolls and how much you have to deal. The attacker announces charging stack and target hex. The attacker moves into the target hex, possible opportunity and reaction charges. You do check to stand. This is based, again, on circumstantial factors. And the check to stand is here by the morale check table. Then you determine combat results in the appropriate tables. It's got to be this here. Yeah, they give the dash line to get over here. So again, you either win, lose, or draw based on the check to stand. If one side breaks on its check to stand, the other side wins. And checking first sucks because you have more of a chance of losing. And then you roll to see what your casualties are. Again, both sides roll a die, so you get a bigger variance of total effects. And then the charge ends, and both sides have to retreat and become blown. All right, we're going to pause there because my battery's running down, and we're going to look into the rolls in a little bit more detail. But that's the main flow of the game there. The two combat types, well, We didn't go into the fire combat because that's really simple enough. It's just range in hexes, gives you casualties and a straggle check there. And then this is... Wait, the result is the fire... Oh no, this is the fire value, sorry. This is the fire value for light or heavy artillery. So you have a range attenuation here. And then you roll here and you get your results expressed as they would be for the melees. I'm sorry, I'm not used to these charts at all, where it's casualty, straggler, morale value. Stragglers in parentheses. Okay. I didn't go into movement, but again, that's pretty much just follow the chart, although the facing and whatnot may be special. Okay, we'll see where we get. Boy, okay, so in addition to the struggle of going through a deep rule book, I also have a pain in my back. Okay, so like in many games, but notably CWB NBS before this, you have a command hierarchy. So you have an army commander. There's no real requirement for the army commander to be any given distance from subordinates. But the army commander is where usually the orders in the system are going to originate. They're going to write the orders and send them out. Below them, the base system has corps commanders who are generally the ones given orders. Under the corps commanders are divisional commanders who have to be a certain distance from their corps commanders if they're operating under the corps commander's orders. They could also be given independent orders. And then there's individual brigades, regiments, whatever, which will be within a certain range of their divisional commander, or else they have a problem. Actually, corps commanders, I kind of lied there. You don't have to be within range of your corps commander. You have to be in range of your corps headquarters. That's not going to be... Montebello is kind of weird because it's got parts of a couple of French corps and parts of an Austrian corps. It's not going to... It's so small that it's not going to have all of this, but we will see it elsewhere. The orders themselves are basically a set of information that you're providing for what the unit is going to do. And like I explained before, engage orders is if you're going to be operating near enemy control or expect to engage in combat, you do an engage order, and that means that you will have to roll an attack stoppage check every turn, and you cannot recover stragglers. General orders allow you to recover stragglers. You can get initiative more easily. That's what it is. It is as expressed in the chart. I thought something might be wrong there, but and basically this is a redeploy to another location or possibly a defend in place. And you could combine those two. Complex orders is when an order is both general and engage, or if it's got some kind of weird conditional setup in it. No order status is if you have no orders whatsoever, and the advantage, this happens to you after an emergency withdrawal if you're ordered to have no orders, which feels really weird, but when you face enemy contact in general orders, you have two choices. You can either drop into a default defense or go into the no orders status, your choice, after a loose cannon, or when an order is completed and there's no follow-ups in it or anything like defend here. You don't need that because you have the default defend in place that you can switch to. If you're without orders, your headquarters is bolted to the ground and cannot be moved until it accepts new orders. And, everything should kind of stay within command range. If an independent division is without orders, the divisional commander has to be bolted to their hex until it takes orders. These are weird situations that are kind of painful. Now they list what the units in no order status can do. The command ranges are have. They can't fire in the fire phase, but artillery can op fire. They cannot start close combat. They cannot initiate cavalry charges. They cannot adopt a default defense directly from no orders. I guess maybe they can do an emergency withdrawal and then, but no, that throws them into no orders again. Yeah. They can recover stragglers more easily, and they get a bonus on order acceptance. They're really supposed to be in reserve. Now, actions which do not require orders is basically, this is the level of detail you don't have to worry about. So army and corps movement and functions, fire combat, close combat, cav charges, movement facing changes and functions, straggler recovery and rally, skirmish release and reattachment. Basically, you can do everything that you need to do tactically to fulfill your orders. Your orders should be broad enough that they're along the lines of, you know, something like move to Casteggio and defend, or attack Casteggio and move through it to get to Rivata, or whatever, you know. I mean, and I've got a pretty good feel for what I'm willing to live with those. It's pretty much the same level that I used in Viva la Emperor and in the CWB games and whatnot. We've talked already about how the orders are generated, what they cost, and how they get somewhere. And then you roll a die and see if it's accepted, delayed, or distorted. If it's delayed, every turn thereafter, you'll be rolling to try to get the hard to achieve, you know, 5 or 6 or whatever that you need to do it. Local initiative has some limitations. You can't try to do initiative as an easier way to get an order that you already have written and that you're in delay or something about. The main idea, though, is you make a roll. If you get the initiative, you can write the order that you want. If you don't get the initiative, well, you might get a loose cannon and your opponent gets to write you a brief, short order. One of the key issues here is if you already had an order, it's gone when you have initiative, even if it's in delay. But if you've got new orders coming, they will override your initiative order when they arrive. In the sense that, you know, you'll keep doing your initiative order until you accept the new order. Default defense. You can throw away your order. Okay, any formation currently under orders can throw away its order and adopt a defend in place order. This doesn't require any special roll. However, the command hub of the command is frozen in place. Units in no order can't do this. Any current orders awaiting acceptance are discarded when you do this. However, a new order will come to you. Emergency withdrawal. A command can, regardless of its order status, execute emergency withdrawal. Cancels its current orders and causes it to fall back. The command must be under threat of being decimated or destroyed due to being under heavy attack, about to be surrounded, or attacking into murderous fire. This judgment is made by the player, and a command may be forced into executing emergency withdrawal through the core attack stoppage. Okay, so the forced to attack or attacking into murderous fire, man, that's the fuzziest one for me. The others, I'm like, yeah, I can understand, but it feels to me like this is a dangerous one to allow for someone to just have attack orders and throw them out because, and they're not just throwing them out, they're going into emergency withdrawal. And they could, of course, have gone into a defend in place instead. They can throw their orders away. So it's the old NBS and the CWB series don't allow you to just discard orders like that. This is more like Viva la Emperor. And I think what they found were that units were following the sort of Pickett's Charge-like destruction that honestly, once you started, you know, I mean, once you wrote that order, it was bound to happen. And that it was just locking you down too much. So I can kind of understand this. I certainly took advantage of, you know, you could throw an order away after 3 turns of following it in Viva la Emperor. This is something similar to that. Between the two. Attack stoppage. We already talked about that. If you're in engage orders, you have to make attack stoppage checks each turn. They, I think, got rid of, I didn't see it anywhere in here, the defensive core attack stoppage or core defense stoppage. That used to be present in CWB and in the earlier NBS rules. I know that Dean Essig, at least, really didn't like that rule. I've always liked it because it's really hard to knock people out of a position without the core defense stoppage. However, it did occasionally cause units to fall apart, you know, under the face of attack in a way that maybe is too extreme. I found it more appealing, but who am I to judge? Yeah, it just felt like units would stay in the line forever without it, that they could hold that line and never leave it. And there are cases where units did perform such valiant defenses, but there are also cases where units just sort of collapsed under attack, and not because, well, see, this is the hard thing. Why did they happen? You know, was each individual component of that command basically wrecked to the point, not just wrecked, but wrecked to the point that they couldn't stand anymore and that their morale losses were just causing them to fall back, which is what I would see in Viva la Emperor, where there are penalties that are fairly significant? Or is it a matter that the whole command is just making the decision to leave? And I like giving some autonomy to these subcommanders who are not me. You know, I have a very clear concept of what it will take to win the game, but I also want my divisional and corps commanders to be able to make their own decisions as to, yeah, I can't hold anymore, that aren't based on what my absolute goals are. But I guess the feeling is that the units fall apart too quickly. I don't know that I found that to be the case. All right. You can break units into giving them independent orders. This has corresponding weakenings. So, for example, if I send a division that's under a corps off on an independent order, that division is no longer counted for the total divisions that corps has for stoppage checks. And the same thing at the divisional level. So here's a division, it has 5 brigades, and 3 of them need to be wrecked for stoppage. Well, if I send one off, both the total number of brigades and the number of brigades that need to be wrecked is reduced by 1. That's fine to me because you're weakening the command, spreading it out, and it should be, you know, it feels fine to give you a worse penalty than maybe is the real situation that way. If I attach, it adds 1 to the total brigades there and adds 1 to the number that need to be wrecked. And that, I feel like, is probably too big a bonus to an attachment. But hey, at least it's symmetrical. I gotta pause. Some lunch got stuck between my teeth, and that, along with the pains and everything else. Okay. Headquarters units are either the Army headquarters or Corps headquarters in the game. If they don't have specific movement orders, they're bolted to the ground, and they're not allowed to move until they get orders. The Corps headquarters have orders dependent on their Corps orders. If a Corps has orders to move, it can move within the limits. Otherwise, it has to remain in its hex. An Army headquarters needs a specific order directed for it to move. This is new. They're giving Army headquarters some real existence and purpose in the game. A move order to an Army headquarters must be issued in person and is considered a general order. There may not even be Army headquarters. Written orders cannot be issued from a moving Army headquarters until it arrives at its final destination, but otherwise it functions normally. I'm trying to remember if there were or not. Corps headquarters that have enemy units step on them when they're on their own, displace to the nearest friendly stack. In the following turn, the entire command gets an emergency withdrawal thrown on it, including stragglers. That's one thing that I didn't mention about an emergency withdrawal. When you take an emergency withdrawal, you make a straggler check for everyone. An Army headquarters that's overrun must also withdraw. This doesn't cause any problems other than embarrassment, apparently. Subunit command and control. They generally want to stay within their command. They have to stay within the command range as much as possible. Command ranges are halved in the no orders status. Cavalry can violate these rules in the midst of a Cav Charge. Artillery that are out of command can only use opportunity fire. They can't use the pre-fire. And then they give the different ranges. It's 4 hexes, brigade to division. Division to corps is 8. And artillery is 4 from a divisional commander or 8 from the corps headquarters. Size. This is, again, like CWB. The base unit of size is a C level of size. Now, these are marked on this chart, so you'll see if you take losses from A, B, you'll go down to A. You take losses from A, you go down to B, you go down to C. And A is the maximum firepower that used to be able to come out of a hex. But now that's not really the case, so I don't know if you're going to see line extensions as much, or at least in the same way. Artilleries are marked by gun points, which are, somewhere around 3 guns each. The chart handles them a little differently here, using circles for them instead of squares. Help show you that they're handled a little differently. Skirmishers have 2 strength, full and reduced. And using the Montebello counters to show things is not as good. So this has a 2-step side, a 1-step side. It says reduced. I think that's also the firepower on them. Not sure. Let's see if we got anything here. Not used to looking at these. I got morale level, indication that it's rifle, reduced, fire value, yeah. How does that work? Determine the modified fire value. I should have explained this either elsewhere or before, but yeah. When you subtract the enemy skirmishers, which counteract that, you take into account various situational effects. You get a number, and you have to roll less than or equal to that number to cause a possible hit, to cause any damage at all. And you can see the damage is just morale and gun loss. The skirmishers are not going to start wiping out the enemy. And this has been the problem in the original version, is that they added direct fire points. And in Viva la Emperor, they really could just actually do real damage to units. Now, Viva la Emperor doesn't really handle stragglers, so it wasn't quite as disturbing there, but it really was in the original NBS. Skirmishers had far too much firepower effect in terms of causing actual casualties. So I think that's a good addition. Formations, no unit can, so we're looking here. Formation changes can trigger opportunity fire. However, rallying routed units to disorganized and recovering blown cavalry to ready, or having a square change formation in close combat does not trigger opportunity fire. The different formations, infantry have line, march column, combat column, and square formation. We'll talk about that in a bit. There's something they're not allowed to have both of the two columns. Skirmish units are always in skirmish formation unless they're routed. Cavalry are either ready or blown. Not having to worry about the different formations of cavalry, which really kind of makes me happy because it didn't do anything in Viva la Emperor. Artillery is limbered or unlimbered. And all of these also have a routed formation, which is what you're in when you're in that morale state. When a unit changes formation, it usually has to keep its facing. However, limbering or unlimbering artillery can do a 180-degree change at no additional movement point, just because of the way the gun carriages are built. They can't change less or more than that. Well, they can't change less than that. A unit in line with line extensions that wishes to change formation to column has to pull its extensions in before it can change formation. Infantry can form squares to protect themselves against cavalry. Only infantry in line or column and their extensions can form a square. This is important. The extensions form the square independent of the unit. All infantry in a stack have to enter square if one wishes to. If they're in the target hex of a cavalry charge, they can enter square, or as a regular formation change during movement. Fat chance, I think, of doing that. I'm just thinking that there's really very little reason to do that. Infantry units entering square as part of movement spend movement point cost for a formation change as usual. No, there is, if you want to form square to get closer to the Cav, because you are able to move in square. Units forming square in a Cav charge do so automatically without spending any movement points, but this ends the unit's move. I guess if it's a reaction charge. Disordered and routed units cannot form square, but units can stay in square if they become disordered while in square. Squares that become routed enter routed formation instead. Squares can move a single hex if they start the movement phase in square, but they have to pass a morale check to do so. If they pass, they move a hex. If they fail, they become disordered and enter column formation. A unit moving this way spent all its movement points and cannot move further. This can only be done into clear terrain and may never be used to enter close combat. Okay. You can voluntarily exit square by making a normal formation change. Now, we don't have formation change costs there, so I'm looking here. In the movement, I'm not seeing formation change. 1-4. Okay, so it costs 1 movement point for infantry to change formation, 3 for artillery to change formation. Nothing else does so. Yeah, because I wasn't hearing anything about it here. Combat and march columns. There's 2 kinds of column formations in the game, march and combat. March are severely hampered in close combat, whereas combat columns offer some advantages compared to lines even. Some nations use one, others use a different. No units can use both formations. It's either or. When a rule refers only to column, it applies equally to combat and march columns. A unit in column is always considered to be in the type of the column its nationality uses. Okay, exceptions. Units in combat column moving across a bridge directly into close combat are considered to be in march column during the close combat. A unit in combat column that just crossed a bridge is in march combat for the purpose of Cav reaction charges. Village fighting. March columns are treated as combat columns when they attack into a village. If a march column is the leading unit in close combat or Cav Charge, the opponent ignores any permanent casualties or stragglers arising from that combat. Only the morale effect is implemented. Units in march column can still initiate close combat, but it's probably a pretty bad idea. Here they specify, so like in Aspern-Essling, the Austrians have like a kind of reduced combat column. Stacking. No more than 3 A levels, 10 gun strength points, and 1 full strength skirmisher can be in a hex at the same time. The stacking applies to each category separately. Stacking limits are checked at the end of the phase in which movement or retreat is there. If overstacked, the stack has its morale state reduced by 1 and must be broken up in the next available friendly movement phase. Routed units can move 1 hex to accomplish this. Repeat as needed. Units can move as a stack as long as each unit's movement allowance is not exceeded. I don't know if there's a real reason for stacking in this game anymore. I mean, movement stacking. Stacks can have but 1 morale state with a morale marker on top of it. They take the worst state of all of them. So here's the thing. In the old NBS, you needed to stack your units to move into close combat, and it was resolved immediately. So your stack mattered. Here, though, there's something about only 1 close combat being able to be engaged, so it may still require you to gather your stack together in the same way. We'll see if we clarify that. All units face hex corners. Cost 1 movement point to change facing by 1 corner, or 1 movement point to do a 180-degree turn. Facing can be changed at will at the end of a retreat with no cost. Units of both players executing a close combat or Cav Charge can change facing freely at the end of the action. Units with all-around frontal facing never spend movement points to change facing. Lines entering a town or village hex change to all-around frontal facing without playing any movement points to do so. Lines exiting such hexes face whichever way they moved. So standard facing, but all-around frontal goes to infantry in line in a town or village, skirmishers, and squares. All-around rear is routed units, and commanders and headquarters have no facing. I have to pause again. My back is really fucking killing me, and I'm just going to need more breaks going through this than even usual. Zones of influence. Now, unlike zones of control, these are basically, hey, something happens, but you're able to do things within these, right? But they're similar to them. Infantry units in march column, disorganized, and routed units do not have a zone of influence. Otherwise, infantry units will have one into their frontal hex sides. Because this is where they can fire, right? Cav and artillery have their own types of reaction capabilities. Okay. A unit trying to conduct operations in an enemy zone of influence can have its morale state reduced. This will happen if the unit's attempting to move directly from one zone of influence to another, or if a unit changes formation in a zone of influence, including square in reaction to a Cav Charge. If a unit retreats from one zone of influence hex directly into another, its morale state will just be lowered by 1 level. Now, this is basically an indication of there is fire capability there, or the threat of fire, and even if it's not handled by reaction fires the way it would have been in TSS, or I think the old CWB and BS systems, it's just an automatic penalty to your morale instead of anything else. This means you don't have sort of those unreasonable levels of fire that can like wipe a unit out if it's just marching in front of an enemy unit. But doing so is putting such a threat on the morale that it guarantees these losses. So I think it works pretty well. Given that you've gotten rid of the ranged fire combat for infantry, units in an enemy zone of influence are not allowed to rally at all. Anything special about movement? You can only move through your frontal hexes, but if you have all around frontal facing, that's everything. The movement points are used for each hex or hex entered or hex side crossed. Standard stuff. Each unit has its own movement allowance, which is given on the movement table, as well as the costs for the various things. Notably, movement points aren't on the counters. That's been the case, going back through CWB, going to TSS, because the movement allowances are based on the unit type. Movement allowances are completely independent. If you have not spent any movement points but have not enough points to enter an adjacent hex, you can move that hex, except for unlimbered artillery or routed units. You may not move into or through prohibited terrain, and it uses up your entire movement allowance, and your morale state drops by 1. You are allowed to enter close combat this way if you want to. There is a specific restriction to that, which we'll get to in a bit. Terrain effects on movement. Nothing too exciting there. No unit can move, charge, or retreat out of terrain into or out of terrain it would not be able to move or charge into. This is interesting because I thought I saw a contradiction to that, but we'll see. The number which had to do with a Cav unit, a Cav Charge. The elevation levels determine the steepness of the slope. If it has 2 elevation levels, it's a slope, i.e. something like this that has one color and another color. A hex with 3 elevation levels is moderate slope, 4 is a steep slope, 5 or more, I don't know if there's any more, is impassable, prohibited. And these are all addressed in here. And noted. Hindering terrain is H. Somewhere we have an explanation of that. I thought we already passed it though, so I want to hit this. No charges are allowed into this hex. Okay. And some of them cause, like this, cost 4 movement points and disorders you. Cost 2 movement points and shakes you. Units may not enter enemy-occupied hexes except for close combat or cav charges. Only friendly units move during the friendly movement phase. Any other kind of motion on the board is not movement. It's retreat or whatever. Reaction charge. All units have to face the same way at the end of movement phase, which may mean that you're not allowed to move into certain hexes because you don't have the points for the facing. However, going back to that, can move into a hex, that can be used to guarantee that you can move one hex and make the facing change. Unlimbered batteries can't move. They can change formation or facing, though, using movement points. Routed units can't move. They retreat. You cannot exit the game map. If you're forced off the game map for some reason, you should be turned all into stragglers. Whatever's left. This is a nice solution towards recovering. So we had a similar issue in Viva la Emperor, which doesn't have specific stragglers, where units went off the board and I had to make up all kind of rules for how they would come back, because technically they'd be destroyed, but destroyed seems too harsh. Turning into stragglers means you have to reform the unit, which, some of that might be bringing it back on the board, but some of it might actually be the straggler effect. Infantry in line can backstep into an adjacent hex. This takes their entire movement allowance and cannot be combined with 1215 just in order to prevent the close combat factor. Squares can move a single hex. Units can get a bonus by being on a road. A unit uses road movement by following the road's path. It pays the road movement cost and ignores the cost of other features. Now, if we look at roads, let's see if they're here. Road, track. Only infantry and column get a bonus out of the infantry, which makes sense. Cavalry, well, the different types are able to get an effect from that. Strangely, clear terrain is cheaper for blown cavalry to move through than a road, a primary road. Artillery is especially bonused by being on the road and stops being ridiculously slow. You keep your facing, you're able to conform with the road for facing when you do road movement, which can be very helpful. That's one of the bigger advantages to it. At least in clear terrain. Forced march is a method of increasing unit speeds while using road movement. However, can cost stragglers. Probably not going to see a lot of that here, but only infantry in column and not disorganized can force march. You must use force march. If you're force marching, you must use road movement. For one set of 3 extra movement points, you make a morale check, and if you fail, you take stragglers. To gain a second set, you make a check for stragglers as above. No unit can gain more than 6. Now, this is worded in such a way, for one set, make a morale check. The failed check means the unit suffers a straggler. It doesn't prevent you from moving. You will get that extra speed no matter what. The question is just how much you straggle. Skirmishers stacked with forced marching infantry can move along the entire distance and remain stacked, even if this would exceed the skirmishers' normal movement allowance. They must stay with the infantry for the entire movement to do this, and don't take any penalties. Reinforcements will be scheduled or randomly modified, but you can't delay, ignore, or redirect reinforcements. They can come in any formation. They move as if they were a long column extending off the map from entry hex. If the enemy units block a specified entry hex, the unit is free to enter free of enemy units within 10 hexes of the entry hex. A unit belonging to a larger formation coming on as part of a reinforcement must maintain its current orders until it's within the command radius of its parent, at which point its orders will become part of the current formation. I don't remember seeing anything here. The older games of the series had an optional road movement where you basically say only a C-sized unit can use road movement in each hex. That's been taken away, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Line extensions allow large infantry in line formation to cover a greater area. These have the same movement, morale, rally, combat, and target characteristics as any other unit. begin them in basically the same hex with the same remaining movement points, facing, and everything as their parent, and then they move out as one of these little arrow things. I'll grab one from here because they're easier to see. And why do we have reds on one side? I don't know the answer to that. They're rare, whatever they are. But the Brits also have them. So, not sure. That might be a left-right distinguishment or something, where necessary. I don't know. At any time during movement, a line extension can be removed in its parent hex. This will cost you 1 extra movement point to absorb it into the parent. Restriction on line extensions, only infantry in line with at least a B strength can generate them. Basically, you have to have at least a C-sized unit in each part of the line extension. No unit can ever have more than 2 line extensions. They can't stack with other line extensions. The levels have to be equally distributed. They can never be in column formation, and the parent can never change formation to a column while it has line extensions. However, they can be in square, and they're considered a separate square from the rest of their formation. Morale results only affect the parent or line extension actually taking the result. However, if any part of the extension is routed, the entire unit collapses into its parent. Losses will be occurring to the full unit and then be distributed equally again as needed. Line extension could suffer a result due to opportunity fire or reaction charge that ends its movement and maybe causes it to retreat. If the parent unit hasn't moved yet, it must end its movement adjacent to the line extension. If the parent already moved, or the parent failed to move adjacent to the line extension, the extension is placed adjacent to the parent in its current morale state at the end of the movement phase. If the line extension is routed, it's treated as a full collapse. It's conceivable that line extensions could end up in an illegal position. If this happens, they go adjacent to the parent and reduce their morale step by 1. If the parent's not there, one of the line extensions becomes the new parent. Each unit has only its own type of combat associated with it. Infantry attack by entering enemy hexes, initiating close combat. Cav attack by executing cav charges. Artillery and skirmishers fire. Skirmishers can also attack in close combat under some special circumstances. Each type of combat is treated separately. Okay, line of sight. So this uses, unlike the old system, which used kind of a simplified line of sight, this uses a line of sight graph where you determine the actual altitude and calculate whether there's blocking terrain against it. This works here because there's enough different levels of terrain, which is to say that this sloping, rather than being this big layer cake model, actually does represent the kind of slopes you would have in the terrain. There could be issues though, like up here, where you're starting to create questionable cases where there's no sloping present, and there's an argument that you wouldn't be able to see stuff going down the hill, even though it's a contiguous slope down from some point. Like up here, well, this obviously blocks, but there's something kind of like that running the spine of the ridge. And this is what I liked about the old version, and I may steal a little bit out of that where necessary. I'm not going to go into too much detail on line of sight. It is correct. It's just... and then they give the standard formula. Visibilities on the game turn track. It's in effect for the turn and there's the maximum number of hexes. If there's no number given, the visibility is unlimited. Okay. If a stack has more than one unit engaged in combat, one unit of the stack is the lead unit. The lead unit is determining the combat and morale modifiers and is the unit that will incur all losses. In artillery and skirmisher fire combat, only the defending stack needs a lead unit. In close combat and cav charges, both sides need one. Normally, the stack's top non-skirmisher is the lead unit. A skirmisher can only be the lead unit if alone in a hex. When artillery performs opportunity fire, the unit that actually triggers the fire is the lead unit. If a stack triggered opportunity fire, use the normal lead. If the lead is eliminated during combat resolution, the next new lead would take the rest of the casualties and will be used for the rest of the combat. Artillery and skirmishers can engage enemy artillery selectively regardless of the target's position in the stack. In that case, the artillery unit is the lead unit for artillery stacked with high morale units. Some special case there. 17.17. I'm not familiar with this. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so artillery targeted separately with high morale units get the bonus that those high morale infantry would get. Reading the combat tables, so there's three values there: permanent casualties, stragglers, and morale change. And we've got that spelled out here. Permanent casualties is the unparenthesized number, stragglers is parenthesized, morale change is the M minus or whatever. We have not lost bloodlust. As you can see, there were counters for it. However, I'm having a hard time seeing it. I think they refer to this bullet. If you roll a natural 1 on the bullet charts, and I think that's what they mean by the bullet, you can gain a bloodlust result. There we go. On an unmodified roll of 1 unwrecked A and B morale units and C morales, it can gain morale plus 2 instead of the table result. But bloodlust is intrinsically linked to that dot. They say bullet, it doesn't look like a bullet to me, but if you're talking bullet points, yeah. And that's what I wasn't sure what it would look like. All right, we've already kind of gone through close combat, but we haven't gone through the steps in detail. Only infantry can initiate it. All units in the defending hex participate in the defense and can suffer. All units wishing to conduct close combat together start the movement phase stacked together. Yeah, this is the same thing. Commanders can join it without having started stacked, though. Only one close combat can be initiated in a given hex against each player turn, which makes sense because they're all performed at the same time. But what it means is you can't move 2 stacks in to the same hex. Attacking units can be wrecked or in any morale state except routed when initiating. The movement point cost is the cost of movement into the hex plus an additional 2 movement points. You cannot use road movement to enter close combat. If you don't have enough movement points, you can still do so as long as you're following the 12.15, 1 hex in and not backing into combat. Initiating close combat ends the stack's movement. There are some exceptions. The attacker must ensure that the attacking stack will be in command at the beginning of the close combat phase. If this cannot be assured, close combat is not allowed. Units that have initiated close combat may not be targets of fire combat in the following non-phasing fire phase. Skirmishers alone in a hex, and not attacked by skirmishers only, may retreat before close combat. This is done in the movement phase. If in hindering terrain, the skirmisher has a choice of retreating or not, otherwise it must retreat. The retreat may not be to or adjacent to the hex the attacker came from. If the skirmisher retreats, the attacking unit may continue to move and initiate even another close combat if it has enough movement points, but it did spend 2 movement points to move in and attack that skirmisher even though it ran away. Cav have to withdraw 6 to 12 hexes if they have close combat initiated against them. The attacking stack can continue to move, but it still spends for the attack. Check to stand. All right. To determine the outcome of close combat, each side determines if it stands, one player before the other. Compare the lead unit morale rating with the check to stand table, roll a die. If you get successful, you get to stand, and then the second player gets to check theirs. If the first player fails their check, the second automatically succeeds without anything. Checking order is determined here. Fortified terrain gives the defender the bonus. If the attacker entered from a hex that had a higher elevation, then the defender has to check first. If it's lower elevation, then the attacker checks first. The smallest stack by letter size, not by total boxes, has to check first. And then finally, the attacker has to check first. The most common case outside of Spain will be smallest checks first. It's because of a lot of terrain in the Spanish maps. But there is in Austerlitz too. Okay. The die roll modifiers are listed on the close combat table. They give some clarifications here. So like if you have skirmishers in the combat, the side with the lower skirmisher, if either side has skirmishers, the side with the lower total fire point value has a disadvantage and a penalty on their check. If you roll high, equal to or higher than the value that you're checking, you stand. And you can see high morale has a very good chance of standing. Check to stand of 6 is always a successful stand regardless of what else happens. There's no automatic failure, which means that there are units that may just automatically stand. I wrote all the modifiers in here. I'm not sure why, except that I think they probably came from errata. And in fact, that may be the case with this other thing that I filled in over here. That was to be added as well. And since nobody printed any more of these games after this one, this is the only one. Talavera is the only one that was published. Okay. So, if the first side to check fails its roll, the other side wins. If the defender failed its check to stand, the attacker wins. If the attacker failed, the defender wins. If both sides succeed, then we get to the firefight, which is going to be a different chart for casualties. And then we roll to see what the casualties are there. We've got die roll modifiers on that one, and we've got die roll modifiers on each of these, which are different based on all the facets. Large units take more casualties off this table. That is a kind of weird thing. The winner in close combat never loses more permanent casualties than the loser, however. Excess losses are just ignored. So a large unit that wins is still limited to one-to-one casualties. Exception, winners in March column always take their full losses. This rule does not apply to firefights. Okay. Defenders that lose close combat are automatically routed. Firefight, both players check their losses based on size and formation. Opponents at different levels is used for both sides in a firefight if the hex the attacker came from had a different top level. That's a minus on both cases. Large stacks get negative morale change results as one level less than stated. Morale -2 becomes morale -1. Losing defenders are still routed no matter what. This doesn't apply to firefights. It's going to be hard to remember all this stuff. I'm going to have to open the rules for it. On tables marked with a bullet, an unmodified 1 causes a blood loss If the stack taking losses had a total size of B or C, both the permanent casualties and straggler results are halved, rounding down, but never below 1. In a firefight, only C-sized units have their losses this way. We have that here. Oh, a lot of this is actually here. Okay. It's just hard to see because it's, I don't know, up above or something. At night, 1 is added to the straggler result. If the straggler result was 0, it's still considered a 1. All positive morale results are ignored at night. I think those are only bloodlust, but whatever. After determining the result, the losing stack retreats 1 hex unless it was routed, in which case it retreats 6 hexes. Remember, the defender, if they lose, is routed. If the attacking stack has to retreat, it retreats to the hex it entered from. A defending retreat may not be to or adjacent to the hex the attacker came from. This retreat must be carried out even if the opponent was completely eliminated in the close combat. You still lost. Both the attacker and defender can freely adjust facing of units after the close combat. In addition, attacking French combat columns can switch to line if they win the combat. How much more under close combat? Just this page, good. If a defender starts at close combat and routed, it automatically fails its check to stand and the attacker automatically passes. Check losses normally. If the attacker is routed before checking to stand, due to artillery opportunity fire, the attacker immediately retreats out of the hex and the close combat ends. Units routed when applying close combat results are treated normally, and it's entirely possible that both the attacker and defender will be routed from a close combat. Routed units retreat 6. An attacking or defending unit with line extensions may be involved in more than 1 close combat. If this happens, resolve them all with that unit before applying any of the results. So the reduction in size on one part doesn't affect the other close combats. They have the size they had when they got hit. If any part of the unit was routed, it collapses into its parent. Otherwise, apply morale change to each part separately. If the unit's wrecked, all parts of the unit suffer an additional morale penalty. Artillery in close combat. When an attacker initiates close combat against a hex containing artillery, the artillery gets to opportunity fire, if it hasn't done so already, using canister. After that, the artillery, I assume that against that unit moving. After that, the artillery unit has no effect on the close combat resolution except possibly adding its size to the defending total. If an artillery unit is defending alone in a hex, it's a C-size unit and checks to stand normally. The attacker does not roll for losses in the close combat regardless of the result. The artillery, if forced to retreat, rolls on the gun loss table instead of the combat losses table. Limbered artillery alone in a hex automatically fails its check to stand, and I think also gets hit with that gun loss table. Now, where is the gun loss table? I've seen it before, but I don't remember where it's hiding. All right. That used to only exist for having to limber and retreat it, I think. But they kept it for this. I gotta swap batteries. Skirmishers in close combat, if they're stacked with other units, they can be in the close combat as attackers or defenders. If they're alone, they can only close combat against other skirmishers. Skirmishers sometimes retreat before close combat, but sometimes they can choose to stay and fight as a C-sized line. Skirmisher versus skirmisher. Check to stand normally. A full skirmisher is twice the size of a reduced for size comparison. Skirmisher versus skirmisher do not use the combat loss table. Instead, the loser takes an M-2 morale change and rolls a die. On a 1, it's reduced. The winner, or eliminated if already. The winner, or both sides in a firefight, suffer no ill effect. Results are handled normally, unless the result was a firefight. In this case, the side that had the lowest modified check to stand roll retreats. The attacker retreats if they're tied. So normally a firefight, the attacker is repulsed no matter what. In skirmishers, there's a chance to gain ground through them. Skirmisher versus artillery. Skirmisher and artillery stacked together without infantry execute close combat as normal. They're considered to have a combined size of C. The artillery is the lead unit. The skirmisher can absorb every other loss as usual. In the case of a firefight, the skirmisher fires as a C-size line unit, whether full or reduced size. Square. Defending units in square automatically change formation to column and lose a morale hit, or take a morale hit, when close combat's initiated. This does not trigger opportunity fire. Exception: if the unit in the square has or is a line extension, it changes its formation to line instead, since a unit with line extensions cannot have a column. This morale change can never cause the unit to become worse than DG. March column. If you're in march column in a close combat, the opponent ignores any permanent casualties or stragglers resulting from the combat. Only the morale result is implemented. Villages have a whole set of special rules. And we're going to break there before we go into Cav Charges, because that is a fairly hefty part of these rules. My back's really fucking killing me now. Okay. Cav Charges. A bit of talking about them. And we've already discussed how they're different between infantry, Cav Charges against infantry, and Cav Charges against other Cav. Shift that there. To initiate and announce a stack that's within 1 to 3 hexes within its frontal arc. This is while you're moving. After you complete the movement of the Cav, it can go another 1 to 3 hexes. This must be free of hindering terrain, but may start from hindering terrain. Now, this is the thing, right? That is completely in contradiction of the rule that I mentioned earlier that there was an issue with. I'll take the Cav Charge issue instead, but I'll take what this claims instead of what was claimed before, which seemed to be more general. The path of the charge must be in as straight a line as the grain allows. Charging Cav cannot use roads or bridges. Hexes entered during a Cav charge do not consume any movement allowance. Blown, wrecked, or Cav in a morale state other than bloodlust or normal may not initiate a charge. An unblocked line of sight must exist between the two units. This is different from what VLE, the Viva la Emperor, did, where Cav Charges could go around obstacles in many ways. But, yeah. The hexes between the charging stack and the target hex must be empty of all units, friendly and enemy. You are allowed to charge through skirmishers, even friendly ones. The target cannot contain an initiated close combat. To charge as a stack, the Cav begin their movement phase stacked together. Commanders can join a charge without having started stacked. The charging Cav units must be in command when the charge is announced, but they can end the movement phase outside of command range. A divisional commander occupying a Cav charge may end up far away from the rest of the division. A hex or stack can be charged any number of times in a phase. The divisional commander can end up away from the rest of his division, in which case he's obliged to try to get back into position in line with his orders as soon as possible. Artillery in the defending hex can opportunity fire, if it's not already done so, against the charging Cav that enters the hex. For Cav charges against infantry, the same hex opportunity fire is not resolved until after the result of the charge is known. In the case of the Cav breaking off, the ability to opportunity fire is determined by a die roll on the break-off table. Which is here. Looks like you need a die roll of 1, but This is really odd because it means that the higher quality cav gives more of a chance of opportunity fire. I don't know. I thought you were allowed opportunity fire no matter what. Okay, we'll see. Cav charges against infantry, and we may see if that's an important factor, because it may be that the opportunity fire might as well be taken at 1 hex. The attacker announces the target stack. The target stack can form a square. 17.42, yeah, we're not there yet, but the artillery cannot opportunity fire when both the charging cav is doing its charge movement and during charge resolution. To do the latter, it must hold its fire. And it's using canister in the final, in the closer ranged one, which probably is a big advantage. Okay, the attacking cavalry, the target forms a square if it wants, probably. The attacking cavalry then moves into the hex of the target stack, possibly triggering reaction charges and or opportunity fire. The defender checks to stand. If the defender fails, the charge is successful and follow-on charges are possible. If the defender stands, the attacker must attempt break-off. If successful, there's no charge. If the attacker fails, the cav is repulsed and the charge ends. The defender has a choice to form square or not. This may trigger opportunity fire from artillery. Only the defender checks to stand in a cav charge against infantry artillery stack. To check to stand, the defender rolls a die and applies the appropriate modifiers from the cav portion of the check to stand table. I would think it would be the infantry artillery portion of it. See, here's the thing. Check to stand is here in cav and in close combat. And what they're saying, I believe, is that you use this one, checking order cavalry, instead of the other one, but it's worded in a way that's a little wrong. Let me see where we have it. The modifiers from the Cav Charge portion of the check to stand table. This may be a... See, the check to stand table looks the same in terms of actual values, so it may be a matter of when they moved it to the charts, and you can see they didn't do a great job with the charts because I had to include things in it. I had to write new stuff in. It may be the case that they split those two. They split a copy of the table for each. Okay. The check to stand roll can be modified to a maximum of ±4. Most of the modifiers are self-explanatory. Check to stand outcome. If the unit rolls equal to or higher than their value, the defender stands and the cav has to attempt to break off. The result of break off will either be a break off or a repulse. If the defender rolls lower, he fails, and the result is a successful charge. A check to stand roll of 6 is always a successful stand. If the charge was successful, the defender is routed, but does not execute its route retreat until follow-on charges are resolved, and checks losses on the defender's losses portion of the charge successful table. Now, I think that not executing the retreat is going to be obnoxious, but I have to try to remember it. Checks losses on the defender's losses on the charge successful table, which is over here. Oh, fuck. Roll one die, adjust by any applicable modifiers, and cross-reference the result with the size of the defending stack. The attacking cavalry checks losses on the attacker's losses on the charge successful table. In a similar fashion, the attacking cavalry can get a bloodlust result, and follow-on charges may now be possible. If none are attempted, the charge ends, and we go to other rules. Break-off attempt. If the defender made a successful stand, the attacking cav must make a morale check. If the unit passes the check, break-off occurs. If the check fails, the cav fails to break off, and the result is a repulse. If there is a successful break-off, the attacker rolls a die and consults the break-off column on the break-off and repulse table, modified by the lead unit's morale modifier. The result will either be a morale change or an OF. That is not what I have here. I have morale changes, OF, and 2 blanks. An OF result means the attacker got so close that artillery in the defending hex got an opportunity fire. Resolve this as canister. The defender also rolls a die. If the result is odd, the defender suffers a morale change. And that is specified there. We're going to have to be really careful to read these charts rather than just assume them. Because there's a lot of words around them that are important in all this procedure. Modify the die roll as indicated. If the defender takes that, the defender suffers no other results. The charge now ends. Follow-on charges. If it's a successful charge, the attacking cavalry can make follow-on charges if desired. The target may either be the original target stack. One of the reasons why you wouldn't route it away is you get to hit it again and again. Or another hex within 2 hexes, subject to all the provisions and restrictions of initiating a charge. Attacking player's choice. The attacking cavalry may target a different stack for each follow-up charge. Up to 3 follow-on charges are allowed. You cannot target cavalry with follow-up charges. These are allowed even if the attacking cavalry has become shaken or wrecked during a charge. Disordered or routed stacks may not follow on charge. It's always voluntary. If the charging cav decides to direct the follow-on charge against the current stack, do not initiate a new charge. Just roll on the defender losses of the charge successful. Charging cav takes no additional losses. So you get to butcher when you break the enemy, and it's probably your best use. Use the original size of the defending stack to determine the appropriate column to use. The defending stack does not execute route retreat until all follow-on charges are resolved. No reaction charges are allowed in reaction to follow-on charges against the same target. If you choose a different stack, the routed defenders are retreated at this point. Okay, so that gets rid of the possible problem. And the attacking stack is refaced so that the target hex is in its frontal arc. Resolve follow-on charges as regular charges. If the target of a follow-on charge was adjacent to the original target and the original target was able to form square but chose not to, the follow-on target may not form square either. Targets within 1 hex of the last target and the subsequent follow-on charges may not form square either. Targets 2 hexes away. Okay. If the target of the follow-up was adjacent to the original target, okay, so targets within 1 hex would be another hex away, I guess. Targets 2 hexes away from an original or follow-on target can form square normally. If the original target did form square, any follow-on targets are capable. I think it's only adjacent ones that can't, because that is within 1 hex. This feels like it's being worded. The wording of this leads you to believe something else, but maybe it used to be 3 hex follow-on and they changed things. I don't know. The whole attacking stack must follow-on charge together without splitting up. May alter the attacking order, though, before the follow-on charge. After resolving all follow-on charges, the Cav Charge ends, and shit. This is the one problem with these, the heavy paper rule books, is that they do end up falling apart. And I'm going to have to fix that staple at some point. After the charge and any follow-on charges are resolved, the charge ends. The attacking cav retreats 6 to 12 hexes, unless the stack is routed, in which case it must retreat 6 hexes, and becomes blown. The cav stack cannot move any further in this movement phase. Defending stacks that were routed due to successful charge results immediately retreat 6 hexes. Notably, the cav charge takes place entirely during the movement phase. Cav charge special cases. If the defender is in a routed state at the start of the Cav charge, it fails to check to stand and the charge is successful. The defender checks losses normally, the attacker takes no losses. If the defender manages to get himself routed after the charge is announced but before checking to stand, resolve as per this rule. That could be because of artillery fire against them as they form square, for example. If an artillery unit or stack is defending alone in the hex, it's treated as a size C unit and checks to stand normally. The attacker does not roll for losses in combat regardless of the result. The artillery unit, if forced to retreat, rolls on gun loss instead of charge successful. Limbered artillery alone automatically fails its check to stand and perhaps loses some guns. A skirmisher alone in the hex and subject to a Cav Charge, regular or reaction, must retreat one hex to escape, either into a hex the cavalry cannot enter, or to a hex with a friendly non-skirmisher. If the skirmisher retreats into a hex the cav cannot charge into, or into a friendly occupied hex, then the cav is placed back to the hex from which it started its cav charge. It's not blown, and it can perform a new charge if it wishes. If the skirmisher cannot reach friends or cover, it's eliminated, and the Cav Charge ends the usual way, with the Cav stack retreating and becoming blown, with no follow-up. Why you might not want to charge skirmishers, because they do expend your Cav. If the skirmisher retreated due to a reaction charge, its movement is ended for the phase. The skirmisher can't retreat into a hex where close combat's been initiated. Cavalry can choose to charge through a hex containing just skirmishers, even friendly skirmishers, in which case the skirmishers have to run out of the way anyway. If the skirmishers cannot move into a hex that isn't in the path of the charge, they're eliminated. Enemy skirmishers will also lose a step if the hex they moved into doesn't contain enemy non-skirmishers or hindering terrain. They'd be eliminated if you pushed through them, if you targeted them, but instead you can cause them a casualty just by running through them. Skirmisher artillery combo. Skirmishers and artillery stacked together without infantry. Check to stand as usual. Their total size is C. The artillery is the lead unit. And if they fail to stand, they check losses on the Cav Charge successful table. The skirmisher can absorb every other loss. This is weird that it's not the gun loss table, but whatever. The attacker does not roll for losses in combat regardless of the result, although any losses and or morale change due to opportunity fire still apply. If the defending lead unit is in march column, the charging cav ignores any permanent casualties from the combat. Only morale loss is implemented on the attacker. All right, I'm going to pause for Cav versus Cav because my back is fucking killing me here. And this is just going to take quite a while to get through. This is a big rule book, but that's life. When Cav charges against other Cav, and this can happen as a counter charge, the attacker announces the target hex, moves into it, possibly causing the reaction charges, whatever, opportunity fire. The target stack has the choice of reaction charging the attacking stack, turning it around. Both sides check to stand. Usually it's going to be the defender first. And the result will be a win for one side or a draw. And then you roll on the Cav versus Cav losses, which will be over here. The defender checks to stand first, followed by the attacker, unless the defender is charging Cav being reaction charged by a unit other than the original target. That defender can choose to check second, but automatically forfeits the original charge if they do so, retreats and is blown after the charge resolution. If the target unit chose to reaction charge the charging unit, the roles will be reversed and the unit that started the fracas will be the defender. The first checking player fails the check, the other player automatically passes. The check to stand can be modified by up to 4. And let's take a look at this. These are opposite. This is against infantry artillery, this is against cavalry. They're in the wrong place. They should be swapped. Yeah, so light cavalry have a penalty, blown or stationary cav have a penalty, blah, blah, blah. All right, plus you've got other factors in play, and what you're doing is you're trying to roll higher than your base number. If you have a good base number, going first and proceeding with your charge after the counter charge might make sense. So, The side that failed its check to stand loses the combat. The other side wins. If both sides stand, the result's a draw. Both players roll on the Cav versus Cav loss tables in both cases. On the column corresponding one loss draw. There are no modifiers, but the losses may be adjusted up or down based on the size, noted here. If the target contains other units than cavalry, these units become routed and retreat 6 hexes. Unlimbered artillery rolls on the gun loss table. If the defending cavalry lost, otherwise they're unaffected. After determining the result, the charge ends. No follow-up charges are allowed. Both sides retreat 6 to 12 hexes and become blown. So let's look at the exceptions, but that sounds like there's no reason. If the defender was a charging stack that did not forfeit its charge to check to stand second and won the combat, the defender may continue the original charge. If the defender was stationary cavalry that did not choose a reaction charge and won the combat, the defender does not retreat nor become blown. If a cav unit was routed, it retreats 6 hexes, no choice of distance, and becomes blown. Reaction charges can happen when something moves into the reaction charge zone of enemy cav. This is treated just like a regular charge. Triggers are listed to the right. It can happen when a unit enters a hex in the reaction zone. The charge takes place immediately after the unit entered the hex. When a unit changes formation in the zone. When a unit attempts to move out of a reaction zone, including into hindering terrain. The charge takes place before the unit leaves the triggering hex, or after the unit has finished its move in the reaction zone. The reaction zone includes all hexes 1 to 3 from the unit that are in any direction and in line of sight of the cavalry. So this seems to show a front hex, but here it's all directions. You can wheel your cav around in reaction charge. Reaction charges can occur in any phase, not just movement phase. Routed units retreating in various combat and rally phases make excellent cavalry targets. This is interesting because most games that I'm aware of limit the cav charges to the frontal hexes, and that includes reaction charges. And the picture seems to indicate that. A cav charge can only have one reaction charge made against it during the charge. You're allowed to initiate a reaction charge against another reaction charge, but only if the initial reaction charge was triggered by a non-cavalry unit. Boy, that's getting complicated. So if infantry moves into a hex that cav can charge into, you can screen that with another cav reaction charge, as an example. These restrictions apply both to charge movement and the subsequent retreat of the charging unit. Reaction charges are not allowed into the target hex of a charging cavalry. Right. No follow-on charges from a reaction charge. If the triggering unit started outside the frontal arc of the unit wanting to reaction charge, it must pass a morale check, so there is at least some impact there. If the reacting cav passes the check, reface the unit so that it can reach its put it in the frontal arc and execute the charge. If the unit fails, it keeps the original facing and cannot reaction charge that triggering unit. This counts as a reaction charge for the one check that you're allowed. So if you look at the Viva la Emperor series, I don't remember the old rules, and maybe I'll take a look at what those are at some point and compare them to this. But in Viva la Emperor, you have to make a check for any reaction charge from cavalry. Here, as long as you put it in your front arc, you've got that reaction set, and that's similar to Wellington's Victory and Ney versus Wellington, where you set your reaction charge to begin with, and that zone you're allowed to charge into. But that game does not allow you to charge outside the reaction step. So it's all like little variances on how capable are you of doing a reaction charge. For non-cavalry, after resolving a reaction charge, the originally moving unit can continue to move if it's able to, unless it formed square, in which case its movement ends. The resolution of the charge does not expend any movement allowance. for the defender. For cav charging other cavalry, the target cavalry unit does or does not become blown as per the rules we just went over. A square that attempts to move but fails its morale check still counts as moving and can generate a reaction charge. I don't know why you'd want to reaction charge a square. That sounds dangerous, because you're just hoping that you can run away from it, I think. Well, no, it could fail its check to stand. Facing changes, routed units rallying, or blown cav recovering never generate reaction charges. Cav which conducts a reaction charge versus a skirmisher which retreats is placed back in its original hex and is not blown. A cav unit can execute any number of reaction charges of this sort and not become blown, just like if they target a skirmisher and the skirmisher runs. Here we've got if infantry triggers a reaction charge from an adjacent cav unit, the infantry gets no chance to form a square for that. Could trigger it by trying to form square, though, which would be troublesome. Guess you don't want to do that. Artillery combat. Let's find the fire phase rules here. In the fire phase, an unlimbered artillery unit can fire through the frontal hexes, one target within range and line of sight. In addition, friendly actions may trigger opportunity fire from the enemy artillery. To fire, you determine the artillery fire value on the artillery fire values table based on the range versus the gun points available. And then it's differentiated whether it's light or heavy artillery, with the heavy in the brackets. A little bit more firepower. If the modified number is 0, there's no fire combat allowed. Modify the artillery fire value based on certain modifiers, target size, formation and stuff that usually affects this, terrain, and also if the target is close combating through the fire's flank and hex sides, they're allowed to still whip or sort of hand haul the guns to try to fire. Sort of, kind of. I don't think they actually change facing. If the result is higher than the modified fire value, okay. So you look in the artillery table and roll a die. If the result is higher than the modified fire value, no losses are taken by the target unit. Well, that looks different from this, right? You get the number, that's the fire value. You roll one die and check the column against that fire value. And here, aha, okay. So this is just being expressed in this table. I'm going to ignore all this and just use the table because, yeah, that's easier than remembering a procedural set. Only unlimbered artillery can fire disorganized and routed units. So this is actually weird here. Hold on. I don't know if I believe this. So let's look at this. If the result is higher than the modified fire value, no losses are taken by the target unit. Oh, but we have a morale check on odd numbers. That's what the difference is. So the actual losses are numerically expressed, and the morale checks are later expressed. If you get a certain value, you get a morale check. Okay. Or a morale effect. Only unlimbered artillery can fire, disorganized and routed may not. Artillery can target other artillery, even if they're not top units of the stack. Skirmishers can also do this. This can lead to 2 artillery fire combats against the same hex, in which case a grand battery is required. Yeah? Oh. That's interesting. I remember the grand battery rules, and I'm not sure that they make sense with that, but I kind of forgot to check that. Artillery may never fire through or over friendly units, including skirmishers, regardless of line of sight. Artillery cannot fire through adjacent skirmishers, despite the fact that they don't block line of sight. They're harassing the gunners. The hexes containing the harassing skirmishers can be targeted by the artillery. Non-adjacent enemy skirmishers can just be ignored and fired through. The artillery units in a hex where close combat has been initiated cannot fire in the non-phasing fire phase, because they're going to only get their fire for the close combat, which might be an opportunity fire as it enters. The flanking line modifier applies when the artillery fire enters a target from a hex in the flank of a target in line formation. Unwrecked A and B morale units, as well as C morale units stacked with a commander with a 1 or better command rating, receive a morale bonus when fired on by artillery. Reduce any morale result by 1 so that an M-2 becomes an M-1 and M-1 becomes nothing. This bonus also applies to artillery targeted separately when stacked with these units. The morale bonus applies even if the unit was wrecked in the fire the morale result came from. Remember, this doesn't affect this bonus doesn't go for wrecked units, but if it was just wrecked, it does. That's definitely different from the original series, where you take the effects of the fire combat first, then you do the morale check. Not sure why that choice was made. Okay, up to 5 points of artillery can fire out of a given hex. Any excess guns are ignored. Artillery can use some of their gun points to fire against one hex and others against another, as long as no more than 5 fire out at one hex. But only 1 point can fire out of a town or village hex. Towns and villages are going to be a pain in the ass. The grand batteries. Okay. A unit may not fire at the same target hex as another artillery unit, even if the artillery units are stacked together, except when all firing artillery are adjacent to the target or in close combat, except for grand batteries. In French scenarios prior to 1805, French artillery stacked with or adjacent to each other may fire at the same target hex. From 1805 on, they can fire without any limits above. And other people have time-based limitations, but the French ones are the best that are available. British and Spanish never get grand batteries, so they're always limited to one. A battery can only fire. Each hex can only be fired on by one battery. When more than one artillery fires at a target, sort the firing units by gun size, add up the gun points, determine the fire values by cross-referencing the number of each gun size to the longest distance, make separate rolls for light and heavy, add the losses together, but only the worst morale change result. If the size is more than 5 gun points firing, execute separate fire combats of 5 points with any remainder. Now this is a little weird because there's a 6 here. And I don't know if you can get to that. Like, if I've got 5 gun points, the most you can fire from a hex, the most I can get in fire value from that is 5. Doesn't matter if it's light or heavy. Fire value modifier, you get a +1. That gets you to the 6 table. And each modifier is and the modifier is applied for each fire. So yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Unlimbered artillery have an opportunity fire zone that extends out within 3 hexes of the front fire arc. You can fire at any units moving within this zone with triggers here. When a unit enters a hex in the opportunity fire zone, it takes place immediately. When a unit enters the hex that the artillery unit is in from the front or flank, the fire takes place after the unit has entered the hex, not necessarily immediately if it's a Cav Charge. When a unit changes formation in the opportunity fire zone, the fire is considered to take place before the formation change, but the firer gets to choose which formation they want to consider it in. Which is like, yeah, if you're turning into a square, sure, I'll bomb you, but I get the square advantage off that, which is cool, even though you haven't quite made it yet. When a unit attempts to move out of an opportunity fire zone, the fire takes place before the unit can leave the hex. After a unit has finished its move in the opportunity fire zone. I think you actually have to do something in your move for that to happen. And those somethings could have triggered the opportunity fire instead. Each artillery unit or stack can only fire at a given unit once in each movement phase. Given this, an artillery unit can opportunity fire any number of times. A single unit may only be fired on by one unit per trigger. So you can get shot several times if there's multiple overlapping fire zones. Resolve opportunity fire as regular artillery fire combat when this happens. Movement or formation change activities of a unit and its line extensions generate op fire separately. I assume you can use the grand batteries for this. Opportunity fire has no effect on the artillery unit's ability to fire in a later fire phase. Oh, we're running low on battery. I know nobody actually watches to this point in the videos. There's a real question as to why I do these. People ask me to cover all the roles. I can't do that all from memory. Certainly not with more complex games. I gave the broad overview that I could. Now I'm giving the more detailed look. I don't know if it helps a damn person. Units executing required retreats never trigger opportunity fire. Entering square during a Cav Charge or reaction charge does. You interrupt the charge sequence, do the op fire, and then continue. A unit disorganized by op fire doesn't form a square. A square that attempts to move but fails its morale check still counts as moving. Facing changes, routed units rallying and blown Cav never generate it. Commanders don't generate it alone. Artillery that opportunity fire at units entering their hex fire canister. They roll twice using their range 1 fire value. Unlike grand batteries, you do add the morale change results of the rolls together. A and B and C morale units reduce any morale change results on each of the rolls. If 2 one-step losses are suffered from canister, the even loss can be taken by a skirmisher. If 4 are suffered. Well, two steps. I don't know. For canister, ignore the +1 modifier for targets in column or size AA, as well as any other terrain modifiers. Not sure why density. Well, density doesn't matter because, okay, so the reason the density is there is because the balls bounce through the formation. And canister doesn't do that. Density would still matter in the sense that the line is more dense, but whatever. Canister can be used if the attacker entered the artillery's hex from a flank hex, though it does so with a -1 modifier. Artillery can never fire against attackers entering from the rear. Skirmishers. Skirmishers can fire. Got its own little chart here. 1 target stack per fire phase. Skirmishers can fire separately or together, but any 1 hex can only be the target of 1 skirmisher fire combat per fire phase. To fire with skirmishers, you add the fire values of all the skirmishers firing against the target, and subtract the fire value of any skirmishers in the target hex. Modify the fire value by the modifiers on the skirmisher fire. So you add the skirmisher fire value, subtract opposing skirmishers in the same hex, and then you get modifiers based on the terrain situation. And yes, towns and villages are really potent. The rifle units, geez, I don't know. I hope there aren't any because they'd be really hard to see on these counters. I had them on some of those and they're not pleasant. All right. So that's your value. Then you roll a die, and if you roll equal to or less than the modified fire value, you've done something to the lead unit. But what you did depends on the unit. Infantry, or against cavalry, it's just a morale check and a commander loss check. Infantry, it's a morale loss and a straggler loss. Artillery, it's a morale loss and a gun point loss. I'm really iffy about this. Because most of the cases, the guns lost is actually taking out the guns. This is taking out some of the gunners. There might be loose gunners around who don't have guns because the guns got taken out, and there might be loose guns around because the gunners are there. And I feel like the losses are kind of both being taken. That just disturbs me, but If you're not going to keep track of gun crews separately, which this game chooses not to, that's what you got to do. Okay. If the sum of the skirmisher fire value is half or less, they fail. Yep. Okay, so we covered most of that. Oh, villages. Fighting in towns or villages has a special dynamic. Towns and villages count as hindering terrain. No Cav charges. They give positive, although Cav can start their charges there, even though there's a rule that says they can't. And offer positive modifiers against fire combat. Zones of influence do not extend into town-village hexes. Only one gun point can fire out of a town or village. Infantry in line that move into a town or village become disordered. This takes place before any close combat. However, infantry in town or village may only rally if they're in line formation. Bloodlust goes away no matter what. The attacker also gets a negative check to stand if the defender is in line. As an exception to 8.4, a unit in march column that attacks in close combat into a town or village counts as a combat column, even if that nation doesn't normally have them. And the reasoning behind that is that when you're marching in there in column to avoid the DG result, you're kind of breaking into small groups and firing and fighting in little street fighting type situations, which don't pose the same problem that like crossing a bridge in march column would, or if you are not able to deploy into a combat column. Close combat in a town or village uses a different procedure than regular close combat. Only the attacker checks to stand using usual modifiers. If he fails, the defender repulsed him, and it's handled normally. If he succeeds, the attacker wins. The defender does not check a stand in village fighting. There are no firefights. The attacker cannot change facing after combat. The attacker won the close combat and is in column. They can continue a mad rush through the streets. Immediately after resolving the close combat, the attacker may move into another frontal hex if it's also town village. No facing changes allowed. If this hex contains enemy units, you get another close combat. Otherwise, just move into the hex. You can continue to do this as long as you don't rout, you stay in command range, you stay in town villages, you do not enter a friendly occupied hex, and Rule 15.12 is not violated. That's the movement point rule, I think, which seems a little odd, but... you can't double back and hit a hex again, which, if a town was big enough, you could do. The attacker is never required to do this. French columns can change formation per 26.5 at the end of the rush. I think they're allowed to throw themselves into line. That. Skirmisher versus Skirmisher close combat do not use these rules. They do theirs as though 15.4.41, which is the normal Skirmisher rules. And if Skirmishers are attacked by infantry, will use the rule. They will use these rules. Special rules for Marengo here. All walled farm villages are just treated as town villages. None are fortified. Casualties are broken into three types. Permanent casualties, which are the regular numbers. Stragglers, which are parenthesized. And morale hits, which we don't really worry about as combat results. And then there's also commander's losses. Anytime a stack with a commander takes permanent casualties or stragglers, except for non-combat losses, as well as when Cav is hit by skirmisher fire, you roll 2 dice for each commander, and on an 11 or 12, one of your leaders may have been or has been hit. Permanent casualties are not recoverable step losses. They'll be marked off on here, and they can be recovered by exceptional cases, but yeah, normally no. Infantry and Cav permanent casualties are on the loss chart, blah, blah, blah. You start marking from this side and work your way across, and eventually you hit a wrecked position. Stragglers are added to the right of the permanent losses, and they can also wreck the brigade, but that's a temporary wrecking. Once the stragglers recover, the brigade can recover its status. In certain instances, infantry suffer stragglers from non-combat causes, retreating into prohibited terrain, emergency withdrawals, forced marches. These will not cause a check for leader losses. I lost something. Skirmishers. Skirmishers can be used to absorb losses even when it's not the lead unit. This is permanent casualties. The owning player at the owning player's option. Only even casualties called by the combat tables can be taken by skirmishers. Take all permanent casualties before recording any stragglers. Yeah. Straggler recovery. You have to fulfill the following. You have to be at least 4 hexes away from all enemy. At night, 2 is okay. You can be in normal or bloodlust. The CWB did not allow you to recover stragglers in bloodlust. The unit has to be in command. If it's not in, the unit can't be under engage orders. The unit cannot have expended any movement points, and the unit did not participate in any form of combat. It looks to me like that's done every turn. The old design used to be every hour. Turns are a half hour, so it's, yeah. And the way you do this is you make a morale check, and there's specific ratings, specific modifiers for the straggler recovery here. There we go. If you pass, you recover a straggler. An A or B morale that rolls an unmodified 6 on straggler recovery gets 2 stragglers instead of 1. This used to all be on charts. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know which is. I found the charts easier to deal with. If a unit is completely eliminated or part of its strength has been lost due to stragglers, but part of its loss has been due to stragglers, it can re-enter play through straggler recovery. When eliminated, the unit gets placed 5 turns ahead of the current turn on the record track, and once it comes up to be available, it can start rolling on straggler recovery within its normal command and whatnot. And as with all of these games, you use X's for permanent losses, slashes for stragglers. I'll color in the box for permanent losses. And probably color in half a box for stragglers because I have trouble seeing, especially with these tiny little boxes. Oh. Okay, morale. So there's a number of different states of morale in the game. Bloodlust, which is a good morale state. Normal is pretty decent. Shaken, disorganized are going to cause you problems in play. Now, in the old system, these resulted in negative modifiers to your morale checks, but that's no longer the case. So now what they're going to do is they're going to affect your stand chances and stuff like that. And then routed, the unit's completely lost order. It falls back 6 hexes and will continue retreating if it's within 6 of an enemy. Some rules require a morale check on the morale check table. The lead unit rolls a die. If it's equal to or higher than the number given on the table, the unit passes its check. So here's the base morale check, and then the effects of it. So for emergency withdrawal, you might get a straggler out of this. For square, you might be allowed to move if you're trying to. A reaction charge, it allows that. Break-off attempt, it allows that. Rallying, it allows it. Cav recovery, it allows you to recover your cav from blown. Straggler recovery, it allows you to get a straggler back. The old system, morale checks meant you might be degrading your morale, but that's baked in as just a, hey, it happens due to combat or due to some other impact that you're taking. So morale changes happen just as a fixed value from one of the other charts. There's no morale checks anymore in the game. The only exception, well, no, there's no exception. A brigade that becomes wrecked takes an additional morale loss, and a commander loss for that command results in additional loss. Certain of the tables have a bullet in them, and they show what a bullet looks like here. If you roll an unmodified 1 on those tables when checking, the checking unit benefits from a bloodlust +2 morale check change. If the unit is not wrecked and has a morale rating of A or B. C morale units only get this if they're stacked with a 1 rated or better commander. The bloodlust result is going to give you 2 bonus levels of, well, if you were disorganized or worse, the +2 gets you up to bloodlust, which is a bonus and in some cases will help you. At the end of close combat or cav charge, one side or the other retreats. In addition, a unit that's routed retreats 6 hexes. Retreats are measured in hexes, not movement points. First 2 hexes of a retreat must be further from the cause of the retreat, unless the cause was further than 2 hexes. In the case of close combat, the first hex has to be the hex that came from for the attacker, for the defender. It has to be on the other side, basically. A unit cannot retreat the required number of hexes. It is removed. For infantry and cavalry, the remainder of its strength is marked off as permanent casualties, unless the infantry can trace a path through prohibited terrain, in which case they mark off the remainder as stragglers. The unit just disintegrates into the bad terrain. Infantry units may still come back from that case. Well, in either case, if they have any stragglers. A stack suffering a retreat can retreat as a stack or split up as desired. If a routed stack retreats through a hex containing another friendly stack, the stack being retreated through loses a point off its morale. If a stack formed by a retreat exceeds the stacking limits of the hex, the stack has a morale state hit, and then the stack must be broken up at the first opportunity or during route movement. If a cav unit reaction charges the infantry by this rule, Jesus, this is over here somewhere. There's just no room. They filled up the sidebar. I love the sidebars in these. They give me space to put stuff, but they used up so much of it here. I gotta swap batteries again, I fear. Where are we? Artillery forced to retreat must limber to do so. If unlimbered artillery is forced to retreat in close combat or cav charge, it must roll on the gun loss table to see if any guns are lost. Now, this has an if in it that I haven't seen anywhere else. So far, I've been thinking that gun loss table is taken when you hit limbered artillery. That doesn't seem to be the case because of this. That's not spelled out in other places, though. A retreating unit enters terrain that would cause it to be shaken or disordered, suffers the effect just as voluntary moving unit would. During your rally phase, you attempt to rally if in any state other than normal. If you're in a zone of influence, you fail to rally. Infantry units in town or village hexes may only rally if they're in line. We follow this. First, bloodlust is removed from anything that's not adjacent to the enemy. Then, anything remaining in bloodlust, you roll a die. On a 1 or a 2, you remove the counter, otherwise it stays bloodlusted. Then, if you're not in a zone of influence, all shaken markers are removed, all disorganized turn to shaken. You may roll a morale check for routed units to see if they remove their marker. You can adopt any allowed formation and facing, except that cav is automatically blown when it comes out of routed. The player can elect not to attempt to rally routed units. And then any remaining routed units that are within 6 of the enemy must retreat. Wrecked brigades and divisions. Okay. So when a brigade hits here, it's wrecked, and it'll suffer certain penalties. including as soon as it becomes wrecked, a morale state loss. When a number of brigades, each brigade that gets wrecked gets marked on here up at the divisional level, and once enough brigades are wrecked, the whole division becomes wrecked. Let's take a look at what that says. I believe wrecked divisions are only going to affect your core attack stoppage checks. And then divisions can feed up into core in the same manner, but these guys don't have one. And we have core here, like the 5th Corps here, but it is only one division, so there you go. This is a tiny, tiny battle, okay? And then they handle the special cases there. All right, Cav special rules. I'm running low enough on battery across the board. Yeah, I have a reserve full one, but that this is a good point to stop. And we're getting close to the end. We're getting close to the end. We'll make it through today, I think. I got fucking stuff to do this week, though. God damn me. Yeah. All right. Cav special rules. During movement, if an infantry or artillery stack moves adjacent to Cav, the Cav has a choice to reaction charge, or it can withdraw. This doesn't blow the Cav. This is really interesting because this is sort of the opposite of the VLE, where the Cav becomes disorganized by that. And worse, it's not clear that it can retreat again if it's disorganized. It seems like it can't. The Cav unit cannot just stay there and let itself get shot all to shit or whatever. This is important because what it means is infantry is not going to close combat Cav. If the moving unit is in a flank or rear hex and a reaction charging unit fails its morale check, the Cav must withdraw. Units that cannot reaction charge because they're blown or whatever will have to withdraw. If an infantry unit, okay, well here, if an infantry unit initiates close combat against a Cav unit, how? Because the Cav unit started adjacent to the infantry, the Cav must withdraw as per above. The attacking unit may continue to move, but has to spend 2 to initiate close combat. Limbered horse artillery is considered Cav for this rule only, and thus must withdraw when enemy infantry or artillery moves adjacent. When Cav is committed, it becomes blown after a charge, with some exceptions, and when rallied from routed. When it becomes blown, it's flipped to its blown formation, basically. Now, note that except for British Cav, which have their own special rules here, and Cossacks, a Cav unit that becomes blown after retreating at the end of the charge, not before the retreat. This is important, and we'll see the why of that. I think that has to do with the artillery, with the reaction charges that it could generate. Blown Cav cannot charge and has reduced movement allowance. Blown Cav in normal or better morale state can attempt to recover, and they roll a rally check. Only Cav belonging to the phasing player can attempt to recover during its rally phase. They make morale checks, yeah. Here they distinguish, in Austerlitz in particular, they did not specify what was heavy Cav and light Cav. They did the same with artillery, and that's covered here. Although the artillery, they actually use a letter instead of the normal symbol. The later games all included some kind of indication. Okay, artillery is either light or heavy, and regular or horse. Heavy are 12 pounders or more. That doesn't really matter. The gun point on heavy artillery will be in black in this game, and it's in white for light. I still don't know about those red arrows on the extended lines. This designation is only used to determine which artillery fire value to use for fire combat. Artillery mobility is foot or horse. This will determine how it moves. Artillery can't move much when it's unlimbered. They have to limber to even retreat a hex. Limbering during a close combat or cav charge causes a gun loss table check. Again, this seems to specify only unlimbered artillery ever makes the gun loss table checks. At the moment of a formation change, it can flip 180 degrees. In general, you can detach artillery from a counter, and the games include additional detached artillery counters. I showed them before. Infantry units in any formation that have uncrossed skirmisher boxes. Okay. Here's an example of one. There are almost no skirmishers on the Austrian side in this game. On the French side, a few more. I've definitely played this one before. I see some marking off. Except when routed, skirmishers are always in skirmish formation. There are three types: normal, elite, and rifle. All British and French skirmishers will generally be elite, and that's going to give them a higher fire value. Those fire and morale values are printed on the counters. See here, here's a French one. It's got a B morale, 2 firepower. If we take a look, well, these are British, they're going to be just as good. Oh, let's see if we can find an Austrian skirmisher. There's got to be one here, right? So here's an Austrian skirmisher. It's got a C morale, and this is the reduced side. The full side has 1 strength point. The reduced side has a half strength point, but that's really hard to read. Oh, we're not getting focus back. That's really hard to read on these homemade counters. They're a little too small. Everything was reduced. I don't know why. I get the feeling that I had to reduce something to get it on one page, and then I had to reduce the counters to get them on one page, and then had to reduce the map to match that, or maybe vice versa. I don't know. Okay. So, units that aren't routed or disorganized can release their skirmishers. This is done by marking the skirmisher box off and putting the skirmisher in the same hex as the unit. Then it can move freely. Skirmishers have all-around front-facing movement allowance of 6, which they can exceed if they're stacked with infantry in column that they're tagging along with. Normal and elite skirmishers can never voluntarily move further than 2 hexes from a friendly non-skirmisher. Rifles can move 3 hexes away. The friendly unit does not have to be the unit that released the skirmisher. Just has to be a friendly unit. Should a skirmisher end up outside this range, it must attempt to move back within range. They're unhindered by any command range. They can enter close combat as an attacker if they're stacked with an infantry, or if the defender is lone skirmisher. Skirmishers may not move adjacent to Cav unless the Cav is wrecked, blown, disorganized, routed, or otherwise unable to charge into the hex entered. Skirmishers adjacent to artillery block fire through the skirmisher, no matter what. If they're yours, you can't fire through friendly skirmishers. If it's an opponent, the skirmishers are picking off the guns and preventing it from making fire at anyone else. They're too annoyed. If skirmishers take a casualty, they get flipped over to reduce. If they take a second casualty, they get flipped over again. Skirmishers stacked with other units cannot be a target for fire, but they can absorb permanent casualties at the owning player's option. It probably isn't a great idea, but it may save you from wrecking a unit, so you got to make your choice there. At the end of a friendly movement phase, a unit can recover its full-strength skirmisher or 2 reduced skirmishers stacked with it, providing the recovering unit has at least a skirmisher box crossed out. You remove the skirmisher, erase the mark, and you can't recover a reduced skirmisher. That has to be left on the board until it pairs up with something. If a player wishes, he can use a skirmisher recovered to erase a permanent casualty from the infantry unit. However, this means the skirmisher will never be a skirmisher again. Any infantry unit can do this, even one that didn't have the skirmishers. If at the end of friendly movement, the unit takes permanent casualty and has unreleased skirmishers, those skirmishers can be put in the line by removing them as skirmishers and replacing the hits. Oh. Commanders represent divisional and higher commanders. They don't affect stacking. They move as normal units without facing or formation. They have a lot of movement points. In close combat and Cav charges, they usually provide positive modifiers to the check to stand and morale checks. If a commander is stacked with a unit that takes losses in combat, it makes a loss check. On an 11 or 12, it takes a hit. In skirmisher fire, make a commander loss check if fire was hit on a cavalry unit, despite the fact that the cavalry unit didn't take any actual losses. Remove casualties. Remove commanders that become casualties from play, but they can come back. They'll get replaced. So an army or corps commander gets replaced by whoever their senior subordinate is. That subordinate, in turn, will get replaced recursively. If you go down to divisional commanders that are wounded, they get flipped over and they have a generic replacement, as do the corps commanders, which can replace a divisional commander that fills a vacancy. If a commander's stack is destroyed, but he escapes unharmed, you put him on the nearest stack that doesn't contain an unresolved close combat. If no such stack exists, remove the commander from play. But if his command comes back, he comes back in and can help unstraggle units by as though he's with them. Okay, in scenarios that go more than one day, any commanders that were wounded, you roll a die for them. On a 1 or 2, they died, and they can't be rolled again. On a 3 or 4, they still exist. They're not dead, and they're not back. On a 5 or a 6, they've recovered enough to join the fighting again, and you shift the leaders back down. I don't know. Somewhere I thought they had a commentary. Yeah, Udino, who took over 20 bullets in his career. A number of these guys took a lot of shots. And one of the things is, a musket round could kill you. It's most likely that, like, an infection or something will. Wow, there's a rainbow out there. I don't know if you can see it. Big, wide one. But the low velocity rounds do so much less damage that even though the bullet itself is quite large, it really, it's a large caliber, but it doesn't have the same kind of damaging force. So there's a good chance that you're not going to get ripped apart the way you would by modern bullets. Yet you might lose important limbs and stuff. Okay, some commanders are considered fighters. They have an F on their counter. These are more at home leading from the front than the staff work. They'll have their normal command rating as on the counter, but they get a +2, never higher than 4, for everything except order acceptance, initiative, and attack stoppage. And then they specify the fighters in the old games. Now, these are usually going to be commanders who are rated kind of poorly because the command rules, you don't want them, to be all that effective for the command rules. I like this distinction, though, because what you end up having is leaders like O'Reilly in this one who aren't necessarily great leaders in terms of receiving and implementing orders, but once they're actually operating with their troops, they are very effective at rallying their forces and in leading a combat. It's almost like it's two different skills and should have been two different numbers all along. So that kind of complicates things. My main memory, well, the memory that I'm using, which is the camera's own memory, ran out. And so this is going to be a long one, I can tell, but we need to do this, and I don't want to split it here. That seems stupid. All right. We did the fighters, special units, levies. Some of the scenarios will have levies in them. They'll be designated as such, and they have restrictions. They can't form a square, and they cost more to change formation and they're probably going to have shitty morale. Some scenarios have wagons, movement allowance of 3, foot artillery for the movement table. They don't have facing. And a hex can only have one wagon at a time, can't enter a zone of influence. Skirmishers can't enter an enemy wagon hex except with a non-skirmisher unit. Road movement may not be used into or out of a hex with a wagon because the wagon's taking up the whole road, essentially. Wagons are destroyed if an enemy non-skirmisher enters their hex. It doesn't have to fight or anything. And they can't be shot. Some of the skirmishers have rifles, which will have these are indicated with a bugle on the counters, but it also says indicated by circular skirmish boxes on the lost chart, which is not what I have here. Okay, good. Because I was going to say I didn't think I had seen any in this one. But they have a little bugle symbol on them, which is hard to see. This gives you a modifier on the skirmish fire. British Cav. Okay. If British Cav charges infantry and the infantry stands, the Cav cannot attempt a break-off unless there's a commander. This is a light brigade situation. They go directly to the Cav repulsed resolution. If stacked with a commander, British Cav checks for break-off normally, but ignores any bonuses for being with the commander. If the commander has a high rating, it doesn't help. British Cav becomes blown before executing its 6 to 12 hex retreat, making it a target for reaction charges that won't be formed effective cavalry. French combat column wins a close combat and may change formation to line immediately afterwards without triggering reaction charges or opportunity fire. There's some Cossacks and irregular Cav that have a C. There may be some that should be that. There's not going to be any in the scenarios that came out in Talvera. I'm trying to think if there's any in Austerlitz. If there are Cossacks, they can only charge disorganized or routed units. If they're targeted by a Cav Charge, they retreat 6 hexes and then become blown. The charging unit is not blown, but may move no further nor charge again this phase, except for reaction charges. Cossack becomes blown before executing its retreat, again similar to the British. The British Cav was notoriously problematic. Nighttime. Okay. Turns at night are an hour instead of 30 minutes, giving more of the time to rest that the player can't access. Visibility is 1 hex. Cav can't charge. Skirmishers can't fire. Artillery can only fire canister as opportunity fire in close combat. So there's no fire phases at night between those two. Skirmishers can only enter hexes with friendly non-skirmisher units or fortified terrain. If a skirmisher starts outside such a hex, it must attempt to go to such an allowed hex. They can tag along with other friendly units that move at night. Stragglers are recovered only 2 hexes away instead of 4, and there may be night modifiers on some of the tables. The command radius is halved at night for commands with general orders. Commands with engage orders or no order status have their command radius reduced to a quarter instead of halved. So remember, general orders are already halved. They're halved again, so everything's quarter. Units caught out of command by nightfall may elect to remain where they are instead of trying to move back into command. This decision is not reversible. If it stays in place and has a retreat result on it, it has to try to get back in command. Any engage order that is implemented at night must be rewritten as a number of independent orders accepted individually for each division of the Corps, even if the Corps in question is forbidden to use independent orders for divisions. These new orders have to conform to the Corps' old order, and what this means is the Corps can be defeated in detail. During the command phase of the last dusk turn, any Corps currently under engage must rewrite these orders. All right, now we're getting to the optional stuff. Night and movement. During night terms, normal movement may only be carried out, including withdrawals but not retreat, may only be carried out along a road or water course, into hexes containing any type of building, points of interest, smaller groups of buildings, into hexes containing friendly units that do not move during the turn. Any other kind of hex is considered risky. When you enter a risky hex, or a series of risky hexes, and end up adjacent to enemy units, or dawn breaks, you roll a die. If you roll less than or equal to the number of risky hexes traversed, the unit has gone astray. Otherwise, the roll has no effect. And you're going to have to keep track of how many risky hexes you've passed through if it's between turns. If you went astray, you return to the last non-risky hex, and then move by the opposing player a number of movement points equal to the movement points expended through the risky hexes. He can do this any way he wishes, except he can't change the unit's formation, or move the unit illegally, or change facing more than one hex side before entering each new hex. He's allowed to move the unit out of command, and then once the opposing player is done moving it, the phasing player can continue to move any remaining movement points. You really don't want to fight at night, which is fine. I won't tend to. Concealed forces. Okay. So the old NBS system used the old CWB concealed forces, which is basically plotted movement. This goes similar to that. But there are going to be concealment markers, and there aren't any provided with the game. We could use different things with it. Counters with numbers on one side. You need numbered boxes to hide the units that are in it. If all the units of a formation are out of enemy line of sight, they can be turned into a concealed force and replaced by a single concealment marker. The concealment force in turn can breed decoys. It takes an unconcealed unit to reveal what's hidden in a concealed force. So on the map, you'll have the concealed force. You can remove all of a division as long as the units are all in command and outside enemy line of sight, and place the conceal marker on the map with the number down. These units are placed somewhere off map and out of sight from the other player, preferably next to the number corresponding with the concealment. Units directly subordinate to the concealed division's core, artillery as well as headquarter and commander, can conceal themselves in a division's off-map stack at the time it conceals itself, provided that they were within command range of the divisional commander and outside enemy line of sight. Brigades on independent orders may be concealed on their own in this manner. Reinforcements may also enter play concealed if the entry hex fulfills the conditions. A concealed force may not move in the turn it's created unless it's a formation entering as a reinforcement. Otherwise, it moves at the speed of the slowest unit of the concealed division, paying movement points for facing changes, and so on. A decoyed concealed force can move at any speed the owner chooses. Of course, you might reveal that it's just bogus if you're moving faster than Cav. A decoy CF can move at any speed the owning player chooses, yeah. A CF may never enter the line of sight of a non-CF enemy unit and must always maintain a 3-hex distance between itself and any enemy CF or unconcealed enemy unit, regardless of LOS considerations. CFs may never stack with other friendly units or CFs except for commanders and headquarters. Retreating units do not ignore enemy CFs. Okay, I want to make a motion here because if you recall in the Milosevic game, I complained about the use and overuse of acronyms. Here we've got a situation where this acronym is expressed only here and only affects this. So it doesn't have the same burden as ones that are all defined at the beginning of the game, at the beginning of the rule set, and then are used kind of sprinkled around throughout. This is one specific place, and it's just using that one term again and again, and I think that's fine. At the start of any friendly movement phase, before creating new ones, the player must have his already existing CFs breed new decoy CFs. A concealment marker not yet associated with any troops may be placed in each hex with a CF in it, and the movement phase, the decoy CF immediately start to behave as any other CF. It may in turn breed new decoy CFs in the next turn. A player may never use more decoys than the number of divisions plus the number of independent cavalry brigades in his army. The number available at any given turn should reflect how many divisions the players have. Here they say in Marengo they start with 4 decoys because they start with 4 divisions on the board. Yeah, so the number of divisions determines that. Okay, how do these get revealed? Well, if a non-CF moves into that line of sight within 2 hexes of an enemy CF, the unit must stop while the CF force deploys according to 28.33, which is down here. If the CF proves to be a decoy, the decoy is removed and is available for breeding again next turn. Note that the revealed force may fire opportunity fire and conduct reaction charge from the instant it is placed on the map, including fire or charges against the very movement that triggered its disclosure. The CFs never cause enemy CFs to be revealed in this way. A CF can voluntarily, which has this implication that 2 forces could pass each other completely unseen. That's possible, but they're basically blindfolding themselves if they do that because they don't have to. A CF can voluntarily revert to real units only at the start of friendly movement phase before any movement takes place. The units are deployed. When, regardless of cause, a CF is revealed, the concealment marker is removed and the commander is placed in the hex. His division then sets up in that and any adjacent hexes while observing the following rules. Now, I've got problems with this. No unit can be placed across prohibited terrain. If the CF moved in the turn before being revealed, infantry units must be in column and artillery limbered as far as possible placed in road hexes. If the CF did not move in the previous turn, the artillery can set up unlimbered. Here's where my problem is. The CF can essentially move along the road and deploy within 1 hex of where the CF counter is. That means that A, you can get an extra hex of movement. Okay, that's not that big a deal because you probably have units that move faster and they can be ahead. But B, you don't have a column going back or anything like that. That I find as problematic. I would almost say if the CF is moving, especially along a road, it really kind of has to follow the appropriate logic for using that road movement. Is that possible? Are you allowed to do road movement? That would be one of the key issues here. I don't see anything that says you can, but I haven't heard anything that said you couldn't either. Of course, I read through that really quickly. Because I'm probably not going to use it in this scenario. The line, everything comes down this road. Other than like a little bit here, everything's visible. This is buildings they would block. You got what, an orchard there. That's not blocking, if I recall correctly. There is some woods on this map. I'm having trouble finding any. This is impassable. Here's some woods. They're hard to see because they're on the top of the mountain. And there's some up in this corner. But yeah, for the most part, the lines of vision are fine in this. Scout stragglers and other activities. At the start of a movement phase, a CF may release up to 1 cavalry unit and or any number of skirmishers from the concealed force, while the rest of the force remains concealed. CFs containing lone cavalry or Just decoys can't do this. The revealed units are placed on top of the CF counter and then can move up to 2 hexes away from it. If they're skirmishers or 4 hexes of Cav, players can agree to use anonymous counters to represent a released Cav to prevent instant intelligence. Yeah, whatever. That's being able to see what the unit is and therefore be able to tell what command you're looking at. The Cav unit's true identity should then be revealed only if it enters the line of sight of an enemy non-CF unit. For those who want to explore these options, there are scout counters on the Concealed Forces PDF, which I did not print out. I didn't realize how usable these rules would be. Largely, they are more usable than the original rules, which involve tracking stuff, just on paper. The idea of like a counter that is the center of the concealed force makes me much happier towards playing something solo. Units in CF may recover stragglers as in any other situation, counting enemy CFs as units when counting distance to enemy units. Commanders may affect up to 3 A's worth of units in the CF. If a CF force marches, either note the number of turns it does so and roll for stragglers for all the marches the instant the force is revealed, or roll for stragglers each turn. A force may not roll for straggler recovery on the turn it conceals itself. Commanders in CFs can, of course, roll for initiative as usual. This needs a bit of trust to be sure to keep track of your actions. Not a problem for me. A CF that suffers a loose cannon result is revealed regardless of where it is on the map, but the enemy player must write the loose cannon order before the revealing takes place. Wow, that could be neat. When visibility changes for the better at dawn or otherwise, the player who moves first has an obvious advantage, as he'll be able to react first to those units that have just been revealed. Therefore, we suggest a mutual revealing should take place after the first player's command phase in order to cancel out the first player's advantage a bit. At a certain range, a commander can no longer make out what is moving, but they would have a chance to make out who is moving about out there. Before they have a chance to make out who's moving, they would know something's there, because rumors don't stir up dust. Therefore, CFs moving in an enemy LOS beyond 15 hexes are revealed only if they are decoy CFs. If there's real troops in them, they wouldn't be revealed. Still not perfect because a small Cav force or whatever. Random events. This is another optional set. You roll on the standard random events table each turn. Well, no, you roll 1 die each turn. If you get a result of 1, you roll 2 dice on this, and that might cause you to roll on the game table. Each specific game has its own events. Then there's some discussion of orders, tactics, and whatnot, and that help give you some idea. There's a lot of designer's notes and historical notes embedded in the instruction, in the rules in general, so that works pretty well. One thing I'm a little worried about here, which is got nothing to do with the game, is where I'm going to put this. Because I'm going to do Montebello as my first scenario, part of me says, hey, let me link the intro to the whole series in the Montebello rolls. But because this is the Talavera boxed set, and this is the only one where you get these rolls other than online, I'm kind of tempted to put it in Talavera. And then part of me is tempted to just put it under the NBS main page. I don't know. I think I'm going to probably stick it in the Talavera one. But in my playlist thing, put the intro over on the Montebello entry. Just link it to the Talavera video entry. Because these rules, while they're applicable to all the games, really kind of, since they come with this box set, it makes the most sense to me. I may come back later and take a look at how things differ between this and the second edition. The first edition is really only Austerlitz. And like I said, it is really rough around the edges. By the second edition, they had cleaned up some of those issues. The game works okay, but it's very different from this. And if I'm getting the feeling that I'm not getting a good enough view into the game, I may actually switch to the second edition rolls for some of the games. Don't know for sure. All right, let's send this up, and now I got to glue together pieces of video from different memory locations, but that's fine.